Human exploration of Mars is no longer science fiction, but decades of space medicine suggest it will fundamentally transform the human body. Earth's gravity, atmosphere, and magnetic field shaped our physiology over millions of years. Mars, with just 38% of Earth's gravity, a thin carbon dioxide atmosphere, and surface radiation up to 200 times higher than on Earth, presents radically different conditions. Studies of astronauts in microgravity show rapid bone density loss, skeletal muscle atrophy, cardiovascular deconditioning, fluid shifts affecting vision, and immune suppression. Prolonged radiation exposure increases cancer risk and can damage the central nervous system. Some effects may be partially reversible with exercise, nutrition, or therapy, but others, such as radiation-induced DNA damage or structural adaptations to low gravity, could be permanent. A mission to Mars is thus not just a journey across space, but a profound biological challenge. Humans who live there may undergo irreversible changes, potentially making a return to Earth dangerous or impossible. Bone density, collapse in Martian gravity. Mars has only 38% of Earth's gravity. When you first arrive, this feels liberating. You can jump higher, lift objects that would be impossible on Earth, and move with an ease you've never experienced. But your skeleton doesn't interpret this as freedom. It interprets it as a catastrophic reduction in the stress signals that tell your bones to maintain their density. Within hours of landing on Mars, your body begins the process of dismantling your skeletal system. On Earth, your bones constantly remodel themselves in response to the mechanical stress of fighting gravity. Every step you take, every object you lift, every moment you stand upright sends signals to specialized cells called osteoblasts to build new bone tissue. At the same time, other cells called osteoclasts break down old bone. This balance keeps your skeleton strong and healthy. But this system evolved specifically for Earth's 1G environment. It has no idea how to function properly in Mars's reduced gravity. In Martian gravity, the mechanical stress on your bones drops by 62%. Your osteoblasts, detecting this reduced load, decrease their activity dramatically. They stop building new bone at the rate they once did. Meanwhile, your osteoclasts continue their work at nearly the same pace, breaking down bone tissue that your body now considers unnecessary overhead. The result is a net loss of bone density that begins immediately and accelerates over the first months on Mars. Studies of astronauts on the International Space Station, which experiences microgravity rather than Mars's partial gravity, show bone loss rates of 1 to 2% per month. That's 12 to 24% per year, rates that would cause osteoporosis in elderly patients on Earth. The hip bones and spine suffer the worst losses because these are the primary weight-bearing structures on Earth. In some astronauts, the bone loss in specific locations reached rates of 2.7% per month. Mars's gravity is stronger than the ISS's microgravity, but not by enough to prevent this catastrophic bone loss. Computer models suggest that Martian colonists might experience bone loss rates of 0.5 to 1% per month. That sounds better than the ISS, but it's still devastating over time. After 1 year on Mars, you'd have lost 6 to 12% of your bone mass. You could lose 30 to 60%. Your skeleton would become brittle, fragile, hollow. The bones most affected are the ones you'd need most for returning to Earth. The femur, the strongest bone in your body, becomes a liability. The vertebrae in your spine, which must support your entire upper body against Earth's gravity, become compression fractures waiting to happen. The bones in your feet, which distribute your weight across the ground, become too weak to handle even normal walking. Astronauts returning from 6-month ISS missions have suffered broken bones from simple activities like stepping off a curb wrong. Now imagine trying to return to Earth after 5 years on Mars. The journey itself takes 7 to 9 months, depending on the alignment of the planets. That's 7 to 9 months in zero gravity, which would cause even more bone loss on top of what you've already experienced. By the time you reach Earth, your skeleton could be 40 to 70% weaker than when you left. The moment the landing vehicle touches down and you feel Earth's full gravity again, the force would be 2.6 times stronger than what your bones have experienced for years. The physiological shock would be immediate and severe. Standing up could fracture your vertebrae. Walking could snap your femur. A simple fall could shatter multiple bones simultaneously. Your skeleton, once a robust framework capable of running, jumping, and handling impacts, has become as fragile as a bird. And here's the truly terrifying part. The damage is cumulative and increasingly difficult to reverse. Studies show that astronauts who spend 6 months in space require 2 to 3 years of intensive rehabilitation to regain their lost bone density, and some never fully recover. After 5 years on Mars, the rehabilitation period could stretch to a decade or more, assuming recovery is even possible. But the problem runs deeper than just weak bones. The process of bone resorption releases calcium into your bloodstream at abnormal rates. This excess calcium can form kidney stones, a painful and potentially dangerous condition. Astronauts in space have a significantly higher risk of kidney stones, and the longer the mission, the higher the risk. On a multi-year Mars mission, the cumulative calcium load could cause chronic kidney problems that make the return journey even more dangerous. High calcium levels can also cause cardiac arrhythmias, muscle weakness, and neurological problems. Exercise might seem like an obvious solution, and Mars colonists would certainly have rigorous exercise protocols. The ISS crew spends 2 to 3 hours per day on resistance training and cardiovascular exercise, using specialized equipment designed to simulate Earth's gravity loading on bones and muscles. But even with this intensive regimen, astronauts still lose significant bone density. The mechanical stress from exercise, while helpful, cannot fully replicate the constant gravitational loading that bones receive on Earth simply from existing and moving through daily activities. On Mars, exercise equipment would need to be even more sophisticated. It would need to provide resistance equivalent to Earth's gravity, possibly using springs, elastic bands, or rotating centrifuges. But there's a fundamental problem. Mars colonists would have jobs to do. They'd be maintaining habitats, conducting research, growing food, repairing equipment, exploring the terrain. They wouldn't have 4 to 6 hours per day to spend on exercise the amount that might be necessary to preserve bone density. Time is a limited resource on Mars, and exercise would compete with mission-critical activities. Some researchers propose pharmaceutical interventions. Drugs that slow bone resorption could help. Vitamin D and calcium supplements might support bone health. Hormone therapies could potentially stimulate osteoblast activity, but these are band-aids on a fundamental problem. No drug can replicate the constant mechanical loading that Earth's gravity provides, and all drugs have side effects, especially when taken for years or decades. The long-term health consequences of using bone-preserving drugs for an entire lifetime on Mars remain unknown. There's also the genetic component to consider. Some people naturally have denser bones than others. Some people's bodies respond better to exercise and maintain bone mass more effectively in reduced gravity. Careful selection of Mars colonists based on genetic markers for bone density could help. But even the most genetically gifted individuals would still experience significant bone loss over years in Martian gravity. Evolution doesn't work on timescales of years or decades. It takes thousands of generations for natural selection to adapt species to new environments. The first generations of Mars colonists would be guinea pigs, testing the limits of human adaptability in real time with their own bodies. Your muscles face a similar crisis to your bones, but the timeline is even more compressed. Skeletal muscle tissue requires constant use to maintain its mass and strength. On Earth, even sedentary people are constantly working their muscles against gravity. Sitting up straight requires back muscles. Standing requires leg muscles. Walking requires coordinated action from dozens of muscle groups. Mars's reduced gravity means all of these activities require 62% less effort, and your muscles respond by atrophying. The process begins within days. Muscle protein synthesis decreases while protein breakdown increases. The balance shifts toward net muscle loss. In microgravity environments like the ISS, astronauts lose approximately 11% of their muscle mass during missions averaging 6 months. The anti-gravity muscles, those in the legs, back, and core that maintain posture on Earth, suffer the most dramatic losses. Some astronauts have lost up to 20% of their muscle mass in their legs. On Mars, the situation would be somewhat better than in microgravity, but still severe. Estimates suggest muscle loss rates of 5 to 8% over the first year, with losses continuing at a slower rate in subsequent years. After 5 years, a Mars colonist could have 25 to 40% less muscle mass than when they arrived. This isn't just about looking less muscular, it's about fundamental loss of strength and endurance. The muscles needed to return to Earth are precisely the ones that atrophy most severely in reduced gravity. Your heart is a muscle, and it adapts to pumping blood in Martian gravity by becoming smaller and less powerful. Your calf muscles, which help pump blood back up from your legs against gravity, weaken dramatically. Your core muscles, essential for maintaining posture and stability on Earth, deteriorate. When you return to Earth's gravity, your body would need to suddenly pump blood against 2.6 times the resistance it's been experiencing, using a cardiovascular system that's become significantly weaker. The cardiovascular effects are particularly insidious because they're not obvious until they become dangerous. In reduced gravity, blood doesn't pool in your legs the way it does on Earth. Your heart doesn't have to work as hard to circulate blood throughout your body. Over time, the heart becomes smaller and less efficient, a process called cardiac atrophy. The chamber walls thin, the stroke volume decreases, and the maximum heart rate under stress declines. This is exactly the opposite of athletic training, which strengthens the heart. Astronauts returning from space missions experience orthostatic intolerance, a condition where standing up causes dizziness, fainting, and severe drops in blood pressure. This happens because their weakened hearts can't pump blood effectively against Earth's gravity, and blood pools in their legs instead of circulating to the brain. The condition can last for days or weeks after return. For someone coming back after years on Mars, the orthostatic intolerance could be severe enough to be life-threatening. Imagine landing on Earth after 5 years on Mars. The moment you're in Earth's gravity again, even lying down, your heart has to work 2.6 times harder than it has in years. When you try to sit up, blood rushes to your legs, and your weakened heart struggles to compensate. Your vision narrows, the world spins, and you might lose consciousness. If you try to stand, the problem multiplies. Your calf muscles, atrophied from years of minimal use, can't effectively pump blood back up your legs. Your core muscles, weakened dramatically, can't maintain your posture. You'd likely collapse within seconds. The readaptation period for cardiovascular function after spaceflight is long and difficult. Studies show that it takes weeks to months for astronauts to regain normal cardiovascular function after 6-month missions. The timeline for someone returning from Mars would be measured in years, and during that entire period, they'd be at elevated risk for heart attacks, strokes, and other cardiovascular emergencies. The strain of readapting to Earth's gravity could trigger cardiac events in people who were perfectly healthy before leaving. There's also the issue of blood volume. In reduced gravity, the body doesn't need as much blood volume because it's easier to circulate what you have. Your body responds by reducing its total blood volume, a process that begins within hours of entering reduced gravity. Astronauts on the ISS lose approximately 11% of their blood volume. This reduction helps them feel more comfortable in space, but it's another factor that makes return to Earth dangerous. With less blood volume, the heart has an even harder time maintaining blood pressure in Earth's gravity. Exercise protocols on Mars would focus heavily on cardiovascular training. Colonists would use treadmills, stationary bikes, and rowing machines, possibly with elastic harnesses, to add resistance and simulate Earth's weight. But again, there's the time problem. Maintaining cardiovascular fitness in reduced gravity requires hours of intensive exercise daily. The ISS crew does this, but they're professional astronauts on short-duration missions. Mars colonists would be trying to maintain this regimen for years or decades, while also working full-time jobs. The psychological toll of the exercise requirements can't be ignored either. Imagine knowing that you must spend 3 to 4 hours every single day exercising intensively, not because you enjoy it, but because failing to do so means your heart will become too weak to survive a return to Earth. This mandatory exercise becomes a second full-time job, one that you can never retire from, one that might not even be enough to prevent the damage. The mental burden of this reality would be crushing for many people. Pharmaceutical interventions for muscle and cardiovascular health exist, but they're limited. Anabolic steroids can help maintain muscle mass, but they have significant side effects, including liver damage, mood disorders, and cardiovascular problems. Beta blockers and ACE inhibitors can help manage blood pressure, but they don't address the fundamental problem of cardiac atrophy. Growth hormone treatments might help, but long-term use carries risks of diabetes and cancer. There's no pill that can replace gravity's constant training effect on the cardiovascular system. Some people's cardiovascular systems are naturally more resilient than others. Endurance athletes, for instance, have hearts trained to handle variable demands and recover quickly from stress. Selecting Mars colonists from populations with exceptional cardiovascular fitness could help. But even Olympic-level athletes would experience significant cardiovascular decline after years in reduced gravity. The human cardiovascular system is exquisitely tuned to Earth's 1G environment, and no amount of individual variation changes that fundamental reality. Mars has no global magnetic field and only a thin atmosphere, leaving its surface exposed to radiation levels that would be illegal to subject workers to on Earth. Every day you spend on Mars, you're accumulating radiation damage that increases your cancer risk, damages your organs, and breaks down your DNA. This isn't about getting a tan. This is about ionizing radiation tearing through your cells and causing permanent damage at the molecular level. The radiation on Mars comes from two main sources. Solar radiation from the Sun includes high-energy protons and electrons that stream continuously through space. This solar wind is normally deflected by Earth's magnetic field, but Mars lost its global magnetic field billions of years ago. The second source is galactic cosmic rays, high-energy particles from supernova explosions and other violent events across the galaxy. These particles are so energetic that they can pass through several meters of rock. Mars's thin atmosphere, only 1% as dense as Earth's, provides minimal shielding from either source. The average radiation dose on the Martian surface is approximately 0.24 millisieverts per day. That's about 250 times higher than the natural background radiation on Earth. Over a year, a Mars colonist would accumulate about 88 millisieverts of radiation, which is equivalent to receiving about 44 chest X-rays. The International Commission on Radiological Protection recommends that radiation workers on Earth not exceed 20 millisieverts per year. On Mars, you'd exceed that limit in about 3 months. You'd have accumulated approximately 440 millisieverts of radiation. This is well into the range where measurable increases in cancer risk become statistically significant. Studies of atomic bomb survivors and radiation workers show that cancer risk increases by about 5% per sievert of exposure. At 440 millisieverts, your lifetime cancer risk would increase by roughly 2%. That might not sound like much, but it's a 2% increase in absolute risk of developing cancer at some point in your life. The effects are cumulative and irreversible. Unlike muscle atrophy or bone loss, which can potentially be reversed with enough time and therapy, radiation damage to DNA is permanent. Each high-energy particle that passes through your body has a chance of striking a DNA molecule and causing a mutation. Most of these mutations are harmless, repaired by your cellular machinery, or result in cell death. But some mutations can cause cells to become cancerous, dividing uncontrollably and forming tumors. The type of radiation on Mars is particularly insidious. High-energy cosmic rays don't just damage single cells. They create tracts of damage through your tissue, affecting multiple cells in a line. They can also generate secondary radiation when they collide with atoms in your body, creating showers of particles that spread the damage. The biological effectiveness of this type of radiation is 2 to 4 times higher than the X-rays and gamma rays we commonly deal with on Earth. Your brain is especially vulnerable. Cosmic rays passing through brain tissue can damage neurons directly, and neurons don't regenerate. Studies on mice exposed to simulated cosmic ray environments show significant cognitive impairment, memory, and behavioral changes. The mice became anxious, less exploratory, and showed reduced learning ability. Human studies are limited, but astronauts who spent time on the Moon during the Apollo missions have higher rates of cardiovascular disease and cancer than astronauts who never left low Earth orbit, where the planet's magnetic field still provides some protection. The cognitive effects of chronic radiation exposure on Mars could be subtle but progressive. You might experience gradually worsening memory, difficulty concentrating, reduced processing speed, and impaired decision-making. These changes would happen slowly over years, making them difficult to notice until they become severe. By the time you realize your mental faculties are declining, significant permanent damage has already occurred. Returning to Earth wouldn't reverse this damage. You'd come home with a brain that's aged decades beyond its chronological years. Mars habitats would need extensive radiation shielding, but perfect protection is impossible. The most effective shielding is mass, lots of it. On Earth, we have the equivalent of about 10 metric tons of atmosphere above every square metre of surface, plus a magnetic field that deflects charged particles. To replicate this protection on Mars, you'd need to bury habitats under several metres of regolith, the Martian soil. But you can't stay underground all the time. Missions outside would expose you to full radiation levels. Equipment maintenance, exploration, scientific work, all of it would require time on the surface. Even underground, some radiation penetrates. Galactic cosmic rays can pass through several meters of rock. To achieve Earth-equivalent protection, you'd need to be under about 6 meters of Martian regolith. Building and maintaining habitats under that much material would be extraordinarily difficult and expensive. Most proposed Mars habitat designs include 1 to 2 meters of regolith shielding, which reduces radiation exposure by about 50%. That's still 8 times higher than the radiation safety limits for workers on Earth. Water is an excellent radiation shield, and some habitat designs propose using water walls to protect living spaces. But water is scarce on Mars and heavy to transport from Earth. Every kilogram of water used for radiation shielding is a kilogram that can't be used for drinking, growing food, or producing oxygen. The trade-offs are brutal. Do you accept higher radiation exposure, or do you sacrifice other critical resources for better shielding? Pharmaceutical countermeasures exist, but are limited. Antioxidants can help clean up some of the free radicals generated by radiation exposure, reducing cellular damage. Some studies suggest that drugs like amifostine can provide protection, but it has significant side effects, including nausea and low blood pressure. Taking protective drugs daily for years or decades raises concerns about long-term effects that we simply don't have data on yet. Your body has repair mechanisms for radiation damage, but they become less efficient with age and with cumulative exposure. Young, healthy individuals with robust DNA repair systems would fare better than older colonists. This creates a harsh reality. Mars colonization might be limited to young adults willing to sacrifice decades of their potential lifespan. Children would be at even greater risk because their developing tissues are more radiosensitive and they have more years ahead of them for cancers to develop. The cancer risk isn't just about dying from cancer decades after returning to Earth. It's about developing cancer while on Mars, far from sophisticated medical facilities. A Mars colony in its early stages would have limited diagnostic equipment and minimal treatment options. If you develop cancer on Mars, your options might be limited to palliative care. The radiation exposure you accumulate makes you a walking time bomb, statistically more likely to develop cancer at some point, and if that point comes while you're still on Mars, you might be facing a death sentence. There's also the impact on reproductive cells. Radiation damages sperm and egg cells, potentially causing genetic mutations that could be passed to offspring. Studies on radiation workers show increased rates of genetic disorders in their children. For Mars colonists hoping to have children, either on Mars or after returning to Earth, the radiation exposure represents a threat not just to themselves, but to future generations. The ethical implications are staggering. Would it be responsible to have children after accumulating hundreds of millisieverts of radiation exposure, knowing they might carry genetic damage? The psychological burden of knowing you're accumulating radiation damage daily, damage that's invisible but irreversible, would be crushing. Every time you step outside the habitat, you'd know you're shortening your lifespan. Every solar radiation event where the sun burps out extra high-energy particles would require sheltering in heavily shielded areas, possibly for days. The constant awareness that you're being bombarded by particles you can't see, feel, or stop would create a level of stress that most people have never experienced. Your immune system is your body's defense against infection, disease, and cancer. It's a complex network of cells, tissues, and organs that evolved to function in Earth's specific environment. On Mars, this system begins to break down in ways that make you increasingly vulnerable to illness and less capable of fighting off infections. The combination of radiation exposure, reduced gravity, stress, and isolation creates a perfect storm that progressively weakens your ability to resist disease. Studies of astronauts in space show that immune function decreases significantly during spaceflight. White blood cell counts change, with some types increasing and others decreasing. The cells that remain become less effective at their jobs. T cells, crucial for fighting viruses and cancer, show reduced activity. Natural killer cells, which destroy infected cells and tumor cells, become less aggressive. The production of antibodies decreases, making vaccines less effective and leaving you more vulnerable to pathogens. These changes begin within days of entering a reduced gravity environment and worsen over time. After 6 months on the ISS, astronauts show significant immune suppression. Their bodies become less capable of fighting infections, wounds heal more slowly, and dormant viruses that were kept in check by a healthy immune system can reactivate. Several astronauts have experienced shingles outbreaks during or shortly after spaceflight, caused by the reactivation of the varicella-zoster virus that causes chickenpox. On Mars, the immune suppression would be chronic, lasting years instead of months. The cumulative effects would be severe. Your body would become progressively less capable of defending itself against pathogens. Minor infections that would be trivial on Earth could become serious medical emergencies on Mars. A simple cut that gets infected could lead to sepsis because your immune system can't mount an adequate response. A viral infection like influenza could be fatal because your weakened immune system can't clear the virus efficiently. The radiation exposure on Mars compounds the problem. Radiation damages the bone marrow, where immune cells are produced. It disrupts the delicate balance of immune cell types, reducing the production of new cells and damaging existing ones. The chronic low-level radiation exposure on Mars would continuously damage your immune system's ability to regenerate, creating a downward spiral where your defenses become progressively weaker. Stress is another major factor in immune suppression. Living on Mars would be extraordinarily stressful. You'd be confined to small spaces, isolated from Earth by communication delays and vast distances, responsible for maintaining complex life support systems, and constantly aware that equipment failure could mean death. Chronic stress causes the release of cortisol, a hormone that suppresses immune function. Studies on Earth show that people under chronic stress are more susceptible to infections, have slower wound healing, and show reduced vaccine response. The stress of Mars would be unlike anything people experience on Earth, sustained for years without respite. Sleep disruption on Mars would further damage immune function. Mars has a day length of 24 hours and 39 minutes, close to Earth but not identical. This slight mismatch can disrupt circadian rhythms over time. Additionally, the stress and isolation of Mars living would likely cause sleep problems in many colonists. Poor sleep quality and insufficient sleep are known to impair immune function, reducing the production of cytokines needed to fight infections and decreasing the activity of natural killer cells. The confined environment of a Mars habitat creates another risk, the easy spread of pathogen. In a small, enclosed space with recycled air, if one person gets sick, everyone is exposed. With suppressed immune systems, an outbreak of infection could sweep through the entire colony rapidly. This has already happened on the ISS, where respiratory infections have spread among crew members despite strict quarantine procedures before launch. On Mars, with no possibility of medical evacuation to Earth, an outbreak could be catastrophic. Returning to Earth after years on Mars would expose you to pathogens your immune system hasn't encountered in years. Earth's microbial environment is constantly changing. New strains of influenza appear annually. Other viruses mutate and evolve. During your years on Mars, your immune system wouldn't have been exposed to these new variants, and it wouldn't have developed immunity to them. Combined with the general immune suppression from Mars living, you'd be extraordinarily vulnerable when you return. The reactivation of latent viruses is a particular concern. Most people carry several dormant viruses in their bodies, kept in check by a healthy immune system. The Epstein-Barr virus, which causes mononucleosis, remains in the body for life. The varicella zoster virus that causes chickenpox hides in nerve cells and can reactivate as shingles. Cytomegalovirus infects most people and remains dormant. On Mars, with a suppressed immune system, these viruses could reactivate repeatedly, causing illness and further weakening your already compromised defenses. The implications for cancer are particularly frightening. Your immune system constantly surveys your body for cells that have become cancerous, destroying them before they can form tumours. This process, called immune surveillance, is a critical defence against cancer. With a suppressed immune system, cancer cells are more likely to evade detection and develop into tumours. The radiation on Mars is already increasing your cancer risk by damaging DNA. The immune suppression means your body is less capable of catching and destroying the resulting cancer cells. The combination is deadly. Pharmaceutical support for the immune system on Mars would be limited. Immune-boosting supplements like vitamin C, vitamin D and zinc might help marginally, but they can't compensate for the fundamental immune suppression caused by reduced gravity, radiation and chronic stress. Immunotherapy drugs that stimulate immune function exist, but they're typically used for specific conditions like cancer treatment and have significant side effects. Using them preventively for years would be unprecedented and potentially dangerous. The selection of Mars colonists would need to favour people with robust immune systems and no history of immune-related disorders. Anyone with autoimmune conditions, immunodeficiency disorders, or a history of frequent infections would be at extreme risk on Mars. But even the healthiest immune system would deteriorate over years in the Martian environment. By the time you're ready to return to Earth, your immune system would be a shadow of what it was when you left, leaving you vulnerable to every pathogen you encounter during the journey home and after landing. Vision, degradation, and intracranial pressure. One of the most unexpected discoveries from long-duration spaceflight is that reduced gravity causes changes in vision, some of which are permanent. The condition, called spaceflight-associated neuroocular syndrome, affects more than 60% of astronauts who spend extended time in space. The mechanism involves fluid shifts in the body that increase pressure inside the skull, deforming the eyeball and damaging the optic nerve. On Mars, this process would continue for years, potentially causing irreversible vision loss. In Earth's gravity, fluids in your body are pulled downward. Blood and other fluids pool slightly in your lower body, and your cardiovascular system works constantly to pump them back up. In reduced gravity, this downward pull decreases dramatically. Fluids shift upward toward your head and chest. Your face becomes puffy, your sinuses feel congested, and the fluid balance inside your skull changes fundamentally. The human skull is a rigid container. When fluid volume inside increases, pressure rises. This intracranial pressure pushes against the brain and the backs of the eyeballs. The eyeballs, filled with fluid themselves, begin to deform under this pressure. The back of the eye flattens, changing its shape from a perfect sphere. This distortion changes how light focuses on the retina, causing vision problems similar to hyperopia or farsightedness. Astronauts on 6-month ISS missions have reported significant vision changes. Some need stronger glasses or contact lenses. Others experience problems with close-up vision that make it difficult to read instruments or conduct detailed work. MRI scans of returning astronauts show flattened eyeballs, swelling of the optic nerve, and increased fluid spaces around the brain. In some cases, these changes persist for months or years after returning to Earth. In a few cases, they appear to be permanent. The optic nerve, which carries visual information from the eye to the brain, is particularly vulnerable. Increased intracranial pressure can cause optic disc edema, a swelling of the optic nerve head where it enters the back of the eye. This swelling can damage the nerve fibers, leading to permanent vision loss. Some astronauts have shown signs of optic nerve damage that didn't fully reverse after returning to Earth. The longer the exposure to reduced gravity, the greater the risk of permanent damage. On Mars, with its 1/3 gravity, the fluid shifts would be less extreme than in microgravity, but still significant. The intracranial pressure would remain elevated for years. Your eyeballs would be under constant pressure, gradually deforming more and more over time. The optic nerves would be subjected to chronic swelling and compression. After 5 years on Mars, the cumulative damage could result in significant permanent vision loss, even if you never return to Earth. The vision changes aren't just inconvenient, they're potentially disabling. Astronauts who've experienced severe vision degradation have reported difficulty reading, problems with depth perception, and challenges performing tasks that require visual precision. On Mars, where you'd need good vision to operate equipment, navigate terrain, read displays, and respond to emergencies, progressive vision loss would be catastrophic. It would make you less capable of doing your job and more likely to make mistakes that could endanger yourself and others. Returning to Earth would make everything worse. The journey home takes months in zero gravity, during which time the fluid shift and intracranial pressure would be even more extreme than on Mars. By the time you land on Earth, your eyes could be severely damaged. Once back in Earth's gravity, the fluids would shift back downward and the pressure in your skull would normalize, but the damage to your eyes and optic nerves wouldn't necessarily reverse. You could be left with permanent vision problems that glasses or contacts can't fully correct. Current countermeasures are inadequate. The ISS crew wears elastic compression garments on their lower bodies to help draw fluid away from the head, but these are only partially effective. Some research suggests that artificially lowering intracranial pressure using medication or mechanical devices might help, but these approaches are still experimental. No one has developed an effective way to prevent the vision changes that occur during long-duration spaceflight. The individual variation in susceptibility is striking and poorly understood. Some astronauts experience severe vision changes after just a few months in space, while others show minimal effects even after a year. Genetic factors, age, sex, and pre-existing eye conditions all seem to play a role, but we can't predict who will be affected most severely. This uncertainty adds another layer of risk. You might be lucky and experience only minor vision changes, or you might be unlucky and lose a significant portion of your sight. For Mars colonists, the progressive vision loss would be a constant source of anxiety. You'd need regular eye exams to monitor the changes, knowing that each exam might show further deterioration. You'd wonder if you'd still be able to read in a year, if you'd still be able to drive a rover in 5 years, if you'd still be able to recognize faces when you return to Earth. The psychological burden of watching your eyesight slowly fail, knowing there's nothing you can do to stop it, would be immense. Your body maintains a precise balance of fluids and electrolytes like sodium, potassium, calcium, and magnesium. This balance is critical for nerve function, muscle contraction, heart rhythm, and countless other physiological processes. Earth's gravity plays a crucial role in maintaining this balance, and on Mars, the system breaks down in ways that create cascading health problems. In Earth's gravity, fluids naturally settle in your lower body. When you stand up, about 500 to 700 milliliters of blood shifts from your chest to your leg. Your body compensates for this through a complex system of sensors, hormones, and reflexes that adjust blood pressure and heart rate to maintain proper circulation. This system, called the orthostatic regulatory system, is finely tuned to work in 1g gravity. On Mars, with reduced gravity, the fluid shifts are much smaller. Your body interprets this as having too much fluid volume because the normal downward pooling isn't occurring. In response, it triggers mechanisms to reduce fluid volume. Your kidneys increase urine output. Hormones that promote fluid retention decrease. Over the first few days on Mars, you'd urinate more frequently and lose several liters of fluid. Your blood volume decreases by 10 to 15%, and your total body water content drops. This fluid loss is part of your body's adaptation to Mars, but it creates problems. With less blood volume, your cardiovascular system has less fluid to work with when pumping blood throughout your body. This makes you more susceptible to orthostatic intolerance and dizziness when changing position. It also concentrates your blood slightly, making it more viscous and harder to pump. The decreased blood volume means less capacity to carry oxygen and nutrients to tissues, potentially affecting physical performance and endurance. The electrolyte balance shifts as well. The kidneys don't just excrete water, they also regulate electrolyte level. The changes in kidney function on Mars alter how your body handles sodium, potassium, and other crucial ions. Some astronauts in space have shown elevated sodium level, which can increase blood pressure and put strain on the cardiovascular system. Others have shown potassium imbalances, which can cause muscle weakness, cardiac arrhythmia, and fatigue. Calcium balance is particularly problematic because of the bone loss occurring simultaneously. As your bones break down, they release large amounts of calcium into your bloodstream. Your kidneys try to excrete this excess calcium, but the high levels can overwhelm the system. The result can be hypercalciuria, excessive calcium in the urine, which dramatically increases the risk of kidney stones. Kidney stones are excruciatingly painful and potentially dangerous, especially on Mars, where surgical intervention would be limited. The formation of kidney stones in space is a known problem. Several astronauts have developed them during or shortly after missions. The combination of bone loss releasing calcium, reduced fluid intake, and altered kidney function creates ideal conditions for stone formation. On a Mars mission lasting years, the cumulative risk would be substantial. Some estimates suggest that up to 10% of Mars colonists could develop kidney stones at some point. A kidney stone on Mars could be a mission-ending emergency. The pain is severe enough to be incapacitating. If the stone blocks the ureter, the tube from kidney to bladder, it can cause kidney damage and life-threatening infections. Treatment options on Earth include shockwave lithotripsy, ureteroscopy, or surgery. On Mars, medical facilities would be minimal, and these sophisticated treatments might not be available. A colonist with a kidney stone might face weeks of agony with only pain medication for relief, hoping the stone passes naturally. The fluid imbalances also affect the body's ability to regulate temperature. Sweating, the body's primary cooling mechanism, requires adequate hydration. With reduced total body water, your capacity to sweat decreases, making you more vulnerable to overheating during physical exertion. Mars habitats would need careful climate control, but during activities outside in a spacesuit, the reduced sweating capacity could be dangerous. Spacesuits generate significant heat from the life support equipment and from your body's metabolism during work. Returning to Earth after years with altered fluid and electrolyte balance would be extremely challenging. During the months-long journey home in zero gravity, your body would lose even more fluid volume. By the time you reach Earth, you could be significantly dehydrated compared to your pre-launch state. The moment you return to Earth's gravity, your cardiovascular system would need to suddenly handle full gravity with depleted blood volume, weakened heart, and altered electrolyte balance. The risk of severe orthostatic hypotension, where blood pressure drops dangerously low when standing, would be extreme. Pre-landing protocols for returning astronauts include fluid and salt loading in the final hours before re-entry. They drink large amounts of water with added salt to temporarily boost blood volume and help prepare for the transition back to Earth's gravity. But after years on Mars, this might not be enough. The cardiovascular system would be so deconditioned and the fluid regulation system so altered that no amount of pre-landing preparation could fully compensate. Pharmaceutical interventions exist, but are imperfect. Fludrocortisone, a drug that helps the body retain sodium and water, can help maintain blood pressure. Midodrine, which constricts blood vessels, can help prevent orthostatic hypotension. But these drugs have side effects, and using them for years would be unprecedented. They also don't address the fundamental problem. Your body's fluid regulation systems have been recalibrated for Mars gravity and can't easily switch back. Muscle coordination and motor control loss. The reduced gravity on Mars doesn't just make you weaker, it fundamentally changes how your brain controls movement. Your nervous system uses proprioception, the sense of body position and movement, to coordinate complex motor tasks. This system evolved in Earth's gravity and relies on continuous feedback about how much force is needed to move your limbs, maintain balance, and interact with objects. On Mars, this feedback is wrong, and over time, your brain rewires itself to function in the new environment, making it extremely difficult to readjust to Earth. Proprioception comes from sensory receptors in your muscles, tendons, and joints. These receptors measure how much your muscles are stretched, how much force they're generating, and what angles your joints are at. Your brain integrates this information unconsciously to control movement. When you reach for a cup on Earth, your brain knows exactly how much force to apply based on years of experience in 1G gravity. The movements are automatic, requiring no conscious thought. On Mars, every movement requires 38% less force than on Earth. At first, this causes you to overshoot movements. You reach for objects too forcefully, push off too hard when walking, and generally misjudge the required effort. But your brain is adaptable. Within days to weeks, it begins recalibrating. Your nervous system adjusts its internal models of how much force is needed for each movement. The proprioceptive feedback gets reinterpreted in the context of Martian gravity. This adaptation is necessary for functioning on Mars, but it means your brain is literally rewiring itself for a different gravitational environment. The motor cortex, cerebellum, and basal ganglia all adjust their processing. Neural pathways are strengthened or weakened based on the new reality. After months or years, the adjustments become deeply ingrained. Your brain becomes a Martian brain, optimized for 3/8 G, not 1G. The implications for returning to Earth are severe. When you land back on Earth, every movement would require 2.6 times more force than your brain has been calibrated for. You'd consistently underestimate how much effort is needed. Reaching for objects would feel like they're stuck. Walking would feel like trudging through deep mud. Your muscles would be weaker from atrophy, and your brain would be giving them insufficient activation signals based on years of Martian calibration. Studies of astronauts returning from the ISS show significant impairments in motor control and coordination. They have difficulty walking in straight lines, trouble with balance, and impaired hand-eye coordination. Tasks that were automatic before spaceflight require conscious effort and concentration. These effects usually resolve within days to weeks as the brain readjusts to Earth's gravity. But the readjustment period after returning from Mars could be much longer. Balance is particularly affected because the vestibular system, the inner ear organs that sense head position and movement, also adapts to reduced gravity. The vestibular system works closely with proprioception and vision to maintain balance and spatial orientation. On Mars, the reduced gravity means different signals from the vestibular organs for the same head movements. Your brain learns to interpret these altered signals correctly for Mars, but this means it forgets how to interpret the stronger signals it would receive on Earth. Astronauts returning from space often experience space motion sickness, a condition where conflicting signals from the vestibular system, proprioception, and vision cause nausea, disorientation, and vomiting. This happens because the brain is receiving signals that don't match its recalibrated expectations. After years on Mars, the sensory conflict upon returning to Earth would be extreme. You might experience severe motion sickness lasting for days or weeks, making it difficult to function or even stand upright. The cerebellum, the brain region responsible for fine motor control and coordination, is especially sensitive to gravitational changes. Studies show that the cerebellum structure actually changes during long-duration spaceflight, with some regions showing decreased volume. These structural changes reflect the functional rewiring occurring at the neural level. After years on Mars, your cerebellum would be fundamentally different from when you left Earth, optimized for Martian movement patterns. Fine motor tasks would be severely affected upon return. Handwriting, typing, manipulating small objects, and any task requiring precise finger movements would be difficult. Your hands and fingers would feel clumsy and uncoordinated. The force feedback from holding a pen or pressing keyboard keys would feel wrong, because your brain expects the lighter touch required on Mars. Relearning these skills would take time and frustration. The psychological impact of losing motor control would be profound. Imagine being unable to do simple tasks that you've done automatically your entire life. You can't walk without stumbling. You can't pick up a glass without crushing it or dropping it. You can't write legibly. You feel trapped in a body that won't obey your commands. This experience, called proprioceptive dysphoria, has been reported by some astronauts after returning from space. It can be deeply distressing and disorienting. Rehabilitation would require intensive physical therapy focused on retraining motor patterns. You'd need to practice basic movements repeatedly until your brain relearns the correct force scaling for Earth's gravity. The process would be similar to stroke rehabilitation, where patients must relearn how to control their bodies after brain damage. But unlike stroke patients, your brain isn't damaged. It's just calibrated for the wrong gravity. The rehabilitation would work eventually, but it could take months or years to fully restore natural movement patterns. The age of the colonists matters significantly. Younger people's brains are more plastic and adaptable. They might readjust to Earth's gravity more quickly. Older adults, whose neuroplasticity is reduced, might struggle more with the transition and might never fully recover their pre-Mars motor control. This creates another selection pressure. Mars colonization might need to focus on younger individuals who have the neural flexibility to adapt and readapt. Virtual reality training before returning to Earth could potentially help prepare the brain for the transition. By simulating Earth's gravity in a VR environment while still on Mars, colonists could begin the recalibration process before the actual return. But this is theoretical and unproven. No one has tested whether such training would actually make the transition easier. It might help, or it might just create additional confusion for an already overtaxed nervous system. Circadian rhythm, disruption and neurological changes. Mars rotates once every 24 hours, 39 minutes and 35 seconds. That's only slightly longer than Earth's day, but that small difference is enough to throw your circadian rhythms into chaos over time. Your body's internal clock, which regulates sleep, hormone release, body temperature, and countless other functions, is tuned to Earth's 24-hour day. On Mars, this clock drifts out of sync, causing sleep disorders, cognitive impairment, and metabolic problems that accumulate over years. The circadian system is controlled by a cluster of neurons in the hypothalamus called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. This biological clock uses light cues primarily from sunrise and sunset to synchronize itself to the day-night cycle. On Earth, this synchronization happens naturally. Your brain sees daylight and the circadian system adjusts accordingly. But the system has limits. It can adapt to time zone changes of a few hours, but constant misalignment causes serious problems. Mars's extra 39 minutes per day might not seem like much, but it adds up. After 25 Martian days, your circadian rhythm would be misaligned by more than 16 hours compared to when you started. Your body would think it's one time while the clock says another. You'd feel jet-lagged constantly, never quite able to synchronize fully. Studies of people living on Mars time for research simulations show significant sleep problems, reduced alertness, and impaired cognitive function. The lighting on Mars compounds the problem. The sun on Mars provides about 43% of the light intensity that Earth receives. Martian daytime is dimmer than Earth's, more like a heavily overcast day than a sunny one. The reduced light intensity means weaker signals for your circadian system. The suprachiasmatic nucleus might not receive strong enough light cues to maintain proper synchronization, leading to a free-running circadian rhythm that drifts even further from the actual day-night cycle. Inside Mars habitats, artificial lighting would be necessary, but replicating the intensity and spectral characteristics of Earth sunlight is difficult. LED lights can provide adequate illumination for seeing, but they might not have the right wavelengths or intensity to properly regulate circadian rhythms. Blue light, which is particularly important for circadian regulation, would need to be carefully controlled. Too much blue light at the wrong times can disrupt sleep, while too little can fail to synchronize the circadian clock properly. Sleep disorders would be endemic among Mars colonists. Difficulty falling asleep, frequent waking during the night, poor sleep quality, and excessive daytime sleepiness would affect many people. These aren't minor inconveniences. Chronic sleep deprivation impairs cognitive function, memory, decision-making, and reaction time. It increases the risk of accidents and errors. On Mars, where split-second decisions and precise work are necessary for survival, sleep-deprived colonists would be dangerous to themselves and others. The health consequences of circadian disruption extend far beyond sleep. The circadian system regulates hormone production, including cortisol, melatonin, growth hormone, and sex hormones. When this system is disrupted, hormone levels become erratic. Cortisol, which should peak in the morning and decline at night, might be elevated at the wrong times, causing chronic stress responses. Melatonin, crucial for sleep, might not be produced in adequate amounts or at the right times. Growth hormone, important for tissue repair, might not be released properly during sleep. Metabolic problems are another consequence. The circadian system regulates insulin sensitivity, glucose metabolism, and appetite hormones. Disruption of these rhythms increases the risk of insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, and obesity. Studies of shift workers on Earth who experience chronic circadian disruption show significantly higher rates of metabolic syndrome. Mars colonists would essentially be permanent shift workers, never quite aligned with their environment. The impact on mental health would be severe. Circadian rhythm disorders are strongly associated with depression, anxiety, and mood disorders. The combination of social isolation, confinement, stress, and circadian disruption on Mars would create ideal conditions for mental health crises. Some colonists might develop severe depression or anxiety disorders that make them unable to function. Without proper psychiatric care, which would be limited on Mars, these conditions could become debilitating or even life-threatening. Cognitive function degrades under chronic circadian disruption. Attention, working memory, processing speed, and executive function all decline. You might have difficulty concentrating on tasks, trouble remembering instructions, slower reaction times, and impaired judgment. These effects worsen with time. After years of misaligned circadian rhythms on Mars, your cognitive performance could be significantly impaired compared to your baseline on Earth. Returning to Earth after years of circadian disruption would not provide immediate relief. The damage to your circadian system, sleep patterns, and metabolic health would persist. Your body would need to resynchronize to Earth's 24-hour day, but after years of adapting to Mars time, this might be difficult. You might experience persistent insomnia, delayed sleep phase disorder, or other chronic sleep problems that last for months or years after return. Pharmaceutical interventions for circadian rhythm disorders exist, but have limitations. Melatonin supplements can help regulate sleep timing, but they don't fix the underlying problem of living on a planet with the wrong day length. Stimulants like modafinil can help combat daytime sleepiness, but they don't improve sleep quality and can cause dependence. Sleep medications can help with insomnia, but long-term use has significant risks, including cognitive impairment and addiction. Behavioral interventions would be crucial. Strict sleep schedules, careful control of lighting exposure, and regular exercise could help maintain circadian function. But compliance with these protocols for years would be challenging. The demands of Mars living might make it impossible to maintain perfect sleep hygiene. Emergency situations, equipment failures, and research deadlines would inevitably disrupt sleep schedules, causing further circadian damage. Individual variation in circadian robustness would determine who copes best with Mars time. Some people are naturally more flexible, able to adapt to shifted schedules more easily. These chronotype differences are partially genetic. Selecting Mars colonists based on circadian flexibility could help reduce the problem, but even the most adaptable people would experience some degree of disruption after years on a 39-minute longer day. Psychological isolation and cognitive deterioration. The psychological challenges of Mars are as dangerous as the physical ones. You'd be hundreds of millions of kilometers from Earth, living in a confined habitat with a small group of people unable to leave without a spacesuit and facing constant life-threatening hazards. The isolation, confinement and stress would cause psychological problems that compound over time, potentially leading to severe mental health crises. When you return to Earth, you'd be psychologically changed in ways that make readjustment to normal life extraordinarily difficult. Social isolation is a profound health threat. Humans evolved as social creatures, requiring regular interaction with diverse groups of people. On Mars, your social circle would be limited to the handful of other colonists in your habitat. Communication with Earth would be delayed by 3 to 22 minutes each way, depending on planetary positions. Real-time conversation would be impossible. You couldn't call a friend when you're feeling down. You couldn't talk to family during emergencies. Every interaction with Earth would be asynchronous, like sending letters instead of having conversations. Studies of isolated groups in extreme environments, such as Antarctic research stations, show high rates of psychological problems. Depression, anxiety, interpersonal conflicts, and social withdrawal are common. The confined quarters and inability to escape from difficult personalities create constant tension. On Mars, these problems would be amplified. You couldn't leave if things got bad. You couldn't transfer to another station or take a vacation. You'd be stuck with the same small group for years. Confinement effects are well documented in psychology. Humans need space, privacy, and variety in their environment. Mars habitats would be small, with every square metre dedicated to essential functions. Privacy would be minimal. You'd live, work, eat, and sleep in the same cramped spaces. The monotony of the environment would be crushing. Outside the habitat is a barren, lifeless desert that looks essentially the same in every direction. There are no trees, no wildlife, no natural beauty to provide psychological relief. The constant awareness of danger would create chronic stress. On Earth, most people can relax and feel safe in their homes. On Mars, you'd never be truly safe. A habitat leak, equipment failure, or life support malfunction could kill everyone in minutes. Radiation storms require sheltering in protected areas. Dust storms can block solar panels and threaten power supplies. You'd live every day knowing that death is one mechanical failure away, and there's no rescue coming if something goes wrong. This chronic stress causes physiological and psychological damage. Cortisol levels remain elevated, suppressing immune function and increasing inflammation. The amygdala, the brain's fear center, becomes hyperactive. The hippocampus, crucial for memory, can shrink under chronic stress. Executive function declines. You become more reactive, more emotional, less capable of rational decision-making. These changes can become permanent if the stress continues for years. Interpersonal conflicts would be inevitable and difficult to resolve. In a small group living in confinement, every personality clash is amplified. There's no escape from people who annoy you. Small irritations become major grievances. Studies of isolated groups show that interpersonal problems are one of the leading causes of mission difficulties. On Mars, with years of confinement ahead, conflicts could escalate to the point of threatening mission success or even turning violent. The lack of sensory stimulation would cause psychological deterioration. Human brains need varied sensory input to function properly. On Mars, the environment is monotonous. The same walls, the same people, the same routine, day after day. Sensory deprivation studies show that even short periods of reduced stimulation cause hallucinations, cognitive impairment, and emotional disturbance. Years of Martian monotony could cause similar effects. Cognitive performance would decline over time. The combination of isolation, confinement, stress, sleep disruption, and radiation exposure would impair memory, attention, and problem-solving abilities. You might become forgetful, have difficulty concentrating, and struggle with tasks that were once easy. These changes would be gradual enough that you might not notice them yourself, but they'd be apparent to others. By the time you're ready to return to Earth, your cognitive function could be significantly worse than when you left. Depression would be a major risk. The isolation, lack of sunlight, confinement, and awareness that you can never spontaneously go home would create perfect conditions for clinical depression. Some estimates suggest that up to 30% of Mars colonists could develop significant depression. Without adequate psychiatric treatment, which would be limited on Mars, depression could become severe enough to cause suicidal ideation or complete inability to function. Returning to Earth after years of isolation would cause reverse culture shock that could be overwhelming. Earth would seem chaotic, overstimulating, and alien. The crowds, noise, weather, plants, and animals would be sensory overload after years in a controlled, sterile environment. You'd have forgotten how to interact with large groups of people. Social cues and norms that you once understood instinctively would seem foreign. You might struggle to readjust to normal life, feeling more comfortable in isolated, controlled environments similar to Mars. Post-traumatic stress disorder is likely for many returning colonists. The constant danger, life-threatening incidents, deaths of colleagues, and years of chronic stress would create conditions for PTSD to develop. Triggers on Earth might cause flashbacks or panic attacks. Loud noises might remind you of habitat alarms. Confined spaces might trigger claustrophobia or memories of being trapped. The psychological scars from Mars would persist long after your body has physically recovered. The social relationships you left behind would be fundamentally changed. While you were on Mars, your friends and family on Earth continued living their lives. Years passed, people moved on, some friends drifted away, family members aged or died. When you return, you'd be stepping into a world that's moved forward without you, trying to reconnect with people who've changed while you were gone. Many returning astronauts report feeling disconnected from their old lives, like they no longer fit in the world they left. Digestive system alterations and microbiome loss. Your digestive system hosts trillions of bacteria, fungi, and other microorganisms collectively called the microbiome. This microscopic ecosystem is crucial for digestion, immune function, vitamin production, and even mental health. The microbiome is shaped by your environment, diet, and the microbes you're exposed to. On Mars, in a sterile, enclosed habitat with limited diet variety, your microbiome would change dramatically, potentially causing irreversible digestive and health problems. The human microbiome contains thousands of different species of bacteria, with significant variation between individuals. This diversity is important for health. Different bacterial species perform different functions, and a diverse microbiome is more resilient and better able to support host health. Studies show that people with less diverse microbiomes have higher rates of obesity, inflammatory bowel disease, allergies, and even depression. On Mars, your microbiome would lose diversity rapidly. In an enclosed habitat, you'd only be exposed to the microbes present in that environment and carried by the other colonists. New microbes couldn't arrive from the outside because Mars's surface is essentially sterile, scoured by UV radiation. Over time, many of the bacterial species in your gut would go extinct locally. Species that depend on specific foods you're not eating would disappear. Species that can't compete well in the confined environment would be outcompeted and lost. Research on isolated populations shows this effect clearly. Studies of astronauts on the ISS show significant decreases in microbiome diversity during missions. The confined environment, limited diet, and absence of exposure to environmental microbes causes the loss of many bacterial species. After 6 months, an astronaut's microbiome is noticeably less diverse than before launch. On Mars, with missions lasting years, the diversity loss would be much more severe. The diet on Mars would be monotonous, which would drive microbiome changes. Food would need to be grown in hydroponic facilities or shipped from Earth at enormous cost. The variety of foods available would be limited. You'd eat the same relatively small selection of crops repeatedly. Many foods that support a healthy microbiome, like a wide variety of fruits, vegetables, whole grains and fermented foods, might not be available or would be rare luxuries. Fibre intake would likely be insufficient. Fibre, particularly diverse types of fibre from various plant sources, is crucial for feeding beneficial gut bacteria. If the Mars diet relies heavily on high-calorie, nutrient-dense foods that are easy to grow or store, fibre content might be inadequate. Without sufficient fibre, many beneficial bacterial species can't survive. The bacteria that remain might shift towards species that are less beneficial or potentially harmful. The loss of beneficial bacteria has cascading health effects. Certain gut bacteria produce short-chain fatty acids like butyrate, which are crucial for gut health and reduce inflammation throughout the body. Other bacteria produce vitamins like vitamin K and B vitamins. Some bacteria help regulate the immune system. Others influence neurotransmitter production, affecting mood and mental health. As your microbiome becomes less diverse and loses these beneficial species, all of these functions are impaired. Digestive problems would become common. With an altered microbiome, many colonists would experience chronic issues like bloating, gas, diarrhea, or constipation. Inflammatory bowel conditions might develop. Food intolerances could appear as the microbiome loses species that help digest certain compounds. The quality of life impact would be significant, and the medical resources to properly diagnose and treat complex digestive issues would be limited on Mars. The gut-brain axis means that microbiome changes affect mental health. The gut and brain communicate constantly through neural, hormonal, and immune pathways. Gut bacteria produce neurotransmitters and their precursors. They influence the vagus nerve, which connects the gut to the brain. They affect inflammation levels that impact brain function. Studies link microbiome changes to depression, anxiety, and cognitive impairment. On Mars, the combination of microbiome dysbiosis and other psychological stresses could create severe mental health problems. Returning to Earth after years with an altered microbiome would expose you to all the environmental microbes you'd been isolated from. Your immune system, having not encountered many of these microbes for years, might overreact. You could experience allergies, autoimmune flare-ups, or inflammatory responses to microbes that are harmless to most people. The recolonization of your gut with Earth microbes could be turbulent, causing months of digestive problems while your system stabilizes. The microbiome changes might be irreversible. Some bacterial species, once lost, might never recolonize your gut. The ecosystem might reach a new stable state that's different from your pre-Mars microbiome and less diverse. Studies of antibiotics, which temporarily wipe out much of the gut microbiome, show that recovery is often incomplete. Some species never return. After years on Mars, your microbiome might be permanently altered. Fecal microbiome transplants could potentially help restore diversity after returning to Earth. This medical procedure involves transplanting stool from a healthy donor into your digestive system, along with all the bacteria it contains. It's been successful for treating certain conditions like recurrent C. difficile infections. But using it to restore the microbiome after Mars would be unprecedented. We don't know if it would work or what the long-term outcomes would be. Probiotic supplements might help maintain microbiome health on Mars, but their effectiveness is limited. Most commercial probiotics contain only a few bacterial species, while your microbiome should contain hundreds. The species in probiotics often don't colonize the gut permanently. They pass through without establishing themselves. For long-term microbiome maintenance, you'd need regular consumption of diverse probiotics, but even this might not prevent the loss of species that aren't included in any supplement. Genetic and epigenetic modifications. The environment doesn't just affect your body, it affects how your genes are expressed. Epigenetics is the study of changes in gene expression that don't involve alterations to the DNA sequence itself. Your genome stays the same, but which genes are turned on or off changes based on environmental factors. On Mars, the combination of radiation, reduced gravity, stress and altered diet would cause epigenetic changes that could become permanent, altering your biology at the most fundamental level. Epigenetic modifications occur through several mechanisms. DNA methylation adds chemical groups to DNA that can silence genes. Histone modifications change how DNA is packaged, affecting whether genes can be accessed and transcribed. MicroRNAs regulate gene expression by binding to messenger RNA and preventing protein production. All of these mechanisms respond to environmental signals, and they can persist long after the initial stimulus is gone. Studies of astronauts show that spaceflight causes significant epigenetic changes. A famous study of twin astronauts, where one twin spent a year on the ISS while the other remained on Earth, showed that spaceflight altered the expression of thousands of genes. Changes were seen in genes related to immune function, bone formation, DNA repair, and metabolism. Many of these changes persisted for months after the astronaut returned to Earth, and some might be permanent. The longer you spend on Mars, the more extensive the epigenetic modifications would become. Genes involved in bone formation would be downregulated as your body adapts to reduced gravity. Genes involved in DNA repair would be upregulated in response to chronic radiation exposure. Genes affecting metabolism would shift to accommodate altered nutrient availability and energy demands. Your genome would be essentially reprogrammed to function in the Martian environment. These changes could affect not just you, but potentially your offspring. Some epigenetic modifications can be inherited, passed from parent to child. This phenomenon, called transgenerational epigenetic inheritance, is controversial and not fully understood in humans, but evidence suggests it occurs. If you have children after spending years on Mars, they might inherit epigenetic marks that affect their health, even if they're born on Earth. The health implications are concerning. Epigenetic changes are associated with increased risk of cancer, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and neurodegenerative disorders. The pattern of epigenetic modifications caused by Mars living might predispose you to developing these conditions later in life. You might return to Earth apparently healthy, but with a molecular time bomb that increases your risk of disease decades later. Radiation-induced epigenetic changes are particularly worrying. Ionizing radiation doesn't just damage DNA directly, it causes long-lasting changes in gene expression that can persist for years. Studies of radiation exposure survivors show epigenetic modifications that correlate with increased cancer risk and other health problems. The chronic radiation on Mars would cause cumulative epigenetic changes that might dramatically increase your long-term disease risk. The stress of Mars living would cause its own epigenetic modifications. Chronic stress is known to cause lasting changes in genes related to the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which controls the stress response, and in genes affecting mood and cognition. These changes can increase susceptibility to depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorder. They might also accelerate biological aging, making you physiologically older than your chronological age. Telomeres, the protective caps on the ends of chromosomes, are affected by both spaceflight and chronic stress. Telomeres shorten with each cell division and are considered a marker of biological aging. Shorter telomeres are associated with increased risk of age-related diseases and reduced lifespan. Studies show that astronauts experience changes in telomere length during spaceflight, with complex patterns of lengthening during the mission followed by shortening after return. After years on Mars, your telomeres could be significantly altered, potentially accelerating your biological aging. The epigenetic clock, a measure of biological age based on DNA methylation patterns, would likely advance faster on Mars than on Earth. Studies suggest that spaceflight accelerates the epigenetic clock, making astronauts biologically older than their chronological age. After 5 years on Mars, you might be biologically 10 or 15 years older than someone who stayed on Earth, increasing your risk of age-related diseases and potentially reducing your lifespan. Returning to Earth wouldn't reset these changes. While some epigenetic modifications might reverse when you're back in Earth's environment, many would persist. Your biology would remain altered, carrying the molecular scars of your time on Mars. These changes could affect your health for the rest of your life, increasing disease risk and potentially limiting your remaining lifespan. The individual variation in epigenetic resilience is significant. Some people's epigenomes are more stable, less affected by environmental changes. Others show large epigenetic responses to even modest environmental shifts. Genetic factors influence this resilience. Selecting colonists based on epigenetic stability could help reduce the problem, but even the most stable epigenomes would experience significant changes after years in such a radically different environment. Interventions to prevent or reverse epigenetic changes are limited and mostly experimental. Certain dietary compounds, like folate and other methyl donors, can influence DNA methylation. Some drugs can affect histone modifications, but using these interventions to prevent the broad epigenetic changes caused by Mars living would be unprecedented. We don't know if they'd work, and they could have unintended consequences. The implications extend beyond individual health to the question of long-term Mars colonization. If people's epigenomes are fundamentally altered by Mars living, what does that mean for a permanent Mars population? Would children born on Mars have epigenetic patterns that make them unable to survive on Earth? Could generations of Mars living create a population that's genetically and epigenetically diverged from Earth humans? These questions venture into territory where science meets science fiction, but they're rooted in real biology. Maximum strain, the body's trial. Even if you've somehow maintained reasonable health during years on Mars, the journey home would be the final gauntlet that many bodies couldn't survive. The trip takes 7 to 9 months in zero gravity, even more hostile to human physiology than Mars's partial gravity. This would be 7 to 9 months of accelerated bone loss, muscle atrophy, vision problems, immune suppression, and radiation exposure. By the time you reach Earth, your body would be at its absolute weakest, and then you'd face the brutal re-entry into full gravity. The spaceship for the Mars return journey would be cramped, probably more confined than the Mars habitat. Resources would be limited. Medical facilities would be minimal. If you develop a serious health problem during the journey, your treatment options would be extremely limited. There would be no possibility of emergency evacuation or rescue. You'd be completely committed to the 7 to 9 month journey with whatever condition develops. Zero gravity is worse for the body than Mars's partial gravity. Studies of astronauts show that bone loss, muscle atrophy, cardiovascular deconditioning, and vision problems all occur faster in microgravity than they would in partial gravity. During the return journey, you'd experience accelerated deterioration of all the systems that were already compromised from years on Mars. Your bones would become even more fragile. Your muscles would waste away further. Your heart would weaken more. Your eyesight could worsen dramatically. The radiation exposure during the journey would add to your cumulative dose. In interplanetary space, there's no planetary body providing even minimal shielding. You'd be exposed to the full intensity of cosmic rays and solar radiation. A large solar particle event during the journey could deliver a dangerous radiation dose in hours. The spacecraft would need a radiation shelter where the crew could hide during such events. But even with sheltering, the baseline radiation exposure during the journey would be significant. Psychological stress during the return journey would be extreme. You'd be aware that Earth is getting closer, but also that each day in zero gravity is making your body weaker. You'd wonder if you'll be strong enough to survive the landing and readaptation. Anxiety about returning home, combined with the confinement and monotony of spaceflight, could trigger or worsen mental health problems. Depression, panic attacks, and interpersonal conflicts could make the journey hellish. The approaching Earth would create growing dread for some returnees. They'd know that landing means facing 2.5 times the gravity their bodies are conditioned for. The anticipation of the pain, difficulty, and potential injury from readapting would be psychologically torturous. Some might wish they'd never left Mars despite all its hardships, because the familiar Martian environment would seem preferable to the unknown suffering awaiting on Earth. Medical monitoring during the journey would show declining health metrics. Bone density scans would show continuing losses. Cardiovascular tests would show progressive weakening. Vision tests might show worsening optic nerve swelling. The medical team, limited though their capabilities would be, would watch helplessly as the crew's health deteriorates, knowing there's nothing they can do to stop it. They could only document the decline and hope everyone survives to reach Earth. The final approach to Earth would require critical decisions about landing procedures. The crew would need to prepare their bodies as much as possible for the shock of Earth's gravity. This would involve fluid and salt loading to boost blood volume, possibly taking medications to support cardiovascular function, and doing exercises to stimulate muscles and bones one last time. But these measures would be inadequate after the cumulative damage from years on Mars plus months in zero gravity. Re-entry and landing would be the moment of truth. As the spacecraft enters Earth's atmosphere, the crew would begin experiencing increasing G-forces. During the descent, they might experience several Gs of acceleration, adding to the challenge. For bodies weakened by years of reduced gravity, even the acceleration forces during landing could be dangerous. Some crew members might lose consciousness. Others might experience cardiac problems as their weakened hearts struggle with the G-forces. The moment the spacecraft touches down and Earth's gravity reasserts itself, the crew would feel like they'd landed on Jupiter instead of Earth. The crushing weight would be overwhelming. Simply breathing would require effort because the diaphragm and intercostal muscles would have to work against gravity to expand the lungs. Lying down would be uncomfortable as body weight compresses organs and tissues. Every movement would feel like you're wearing a suit made of lead. Attempting to sit up would be extremely difficult and potentially dangerous. The weakened core muscles might be unable to handle the task. The cardiovascular system, trying to pump blood upward against full Earth gravity with a weakened heart and reduced blood volume, might fail to maintain adequate blood pressure. Many returning crew members would experience severe orthostatic hypertension, with blood pressure dropping dangerously low. Vision might narrow to a tunnel. The world might spin, and consciousness might slip away. Standing would be virtually impossible without support. The leg muscles, atrophied from years of minimal use, couldn't support body weight. The bones in the legs, weakened and brittle, might fracture under the load. The cardiovascular system would struggle even more with blood pooling in the legs. Most returning Mars astronauts would need to be carried from the spacecraft on stretchers, unable to walk or even sit upright safely. The immediate post-landing period would be a medical emergency for the entire crew. They'd need intensive medical support, potentially including intravenous fluids to boost blood volume, medications to support blood pressure and heart function, supplemental oxygen if breathing is compromised, and immediate assessment for fractures or other injuries. The rehabilitation process would begin immediately, but the crew would be at their absolute most vulnerable. Some might not survive the first few days on Earth, succumbing to cardiac events, orthostatic collapse, or complications from their weakened state. Respiratory system adaptation and oxygen dependency. Mars habitats would operate under fundamentally different atmospheric conditions than Earth. And this isn't just about having air to breathe. The pressure, oxygen concentration, and gas mixture would all differ from what your lungs evolved to process. Most proposed Mars habitat designs call for atmospheric pressures between 50 and 70 kilopascals, roughly half of Earth's sea level pressure of 101.3 kilopascals. This reduction isn't arbitrary. Building habitats that can withstand full Earth pressure would require massively thick walls and enormous structural reinforcement. The engineering challenges and costs would be prohibitive. Lower pressure means thinner walls, lighter structures, and reduced risk of catastrophic decompression if there's a breach. But living at half pressure creates its own set of problems. At 50 kilopascals, with Earth's normal 21% oxygen concentration, you'd only be getting about 10.5 kilopascals of oxygen partial pressure, equivalent to breathing at 5,500 meters altitude on Earth. That's higher than any permanent human settlement on Earth and would cause altitude sickness, cognitive impairment, and inadequate oxygen delivery to tissues. To compensate, Mars habitats would need to boost oxygen concentration to 32 to 35%. This gives adequate oxygen partial pressure for human function, but it means you're breathing a fundamentally different atmosphere than Earth's. Your lungs would begin adapting to these conditions within weeks. The alveoli, the microscopic air sacs where oxygen enters your blood and carbon dioxide exits, would undergo structural remodeling. The walls between alveoli might thin to facilitate gas exchange in the lower pressure environment. The capillary networks surrounding alveoli could become denser or sparser depending on oxygen availability. The surface area of your lungs might actually change as tissue remodels to optimize for the new atmospheric conditions. These aren't conscious changes you can control. They're automatic physiological responses to the environment. The mechanics of breathing would change too. At lower atmospheric pressure, each breath moves less total gas mass even if the volume is the same. Your respiratory muscles, the diaphragm and intercostals, would need to work differently to achieve adequate ventilation. The neural control centers in your brainstem that regulate breathing rhythm and depth would recalibrate. After months on Mars, your breathing pattern would be optimized for the habitat atmosphere, with different rates, depths, and muscular coordination than Earth breathing. Red blood cell production would shift dramatically based on oxygen availability. Your kidneys produce erythropoietin, a hormone that stimulates bone marrow to make red blood cells. If your tissues detect insufficient oxygen delivery, erythropoietin production increases. You'd develop more red blood cells to carry more oxygen per unit of blood. This is the same adaptation that occurs in people living at high altitude on Earth. Mountaineers acclimatizing to Everest Base Camp see their hematocrit, the percentage of blood volume that's red cells, increase from a normal 45% to 55% or even 60%. Higher hematocrit makes blood more viscous, literally thicker, and harder to pump. Your heart has to work harder to circulate blood through your vessels. The increased viscosity also raises the risk of blood clots forming. Deep vein thrombosis, pulmonary embolism, and stroke all become more likely. Some high-altitude climbers develop such high hematocrit that they need therapeutic phlebotomy, having blood drawn regularly to keep their blood from becoming dangerously thick. Mars colonists living for years in altered atmospheric conditions might face similar issues. The danger comes when you return to Earth. Suddenly, you're breathing 21% oxygen at full atmospheric pressure, delivering far more oxygen per breath than your Mars-adapted respiratory system expects. Your lungs, optimized for extracting oxygen from thin, enriched air, would be getting a massive oxygen surplus. Hyperoxia, excessive oxygen in the blood, can cause problems. Oxygen is a highly reactive molecule that generates free radicals, unstable molecules that damage cells. While we need oxygen to live, too much causes oxidative stress that injures lung tissue, potentially leading to acute respiratory distress. Your breathing control centers would be confused. The chemoreceptors that monitor blood oxygen and carbon dioxide levels would be reading values far outside the range they've adapted to. You might hyperventilate, breathing too fast and deep because your brain thinks you're not getting enough air when you actually are. Or you might hypoventilate, breathing too shallow because the oxygen sensors are overwhelmed. Finding the right breathing rhythm would take conscious effort, which is exhausting and anxiety-producing. The elevated red blood cell count from Mars would suddenly be excessive on Earth. Your blood would be dangerously thick, your clotting risk through the roof. You'd likely need immediate therapeutic phlebotomy to reduce blood volume and hematocrit. But removing blood creates its own problems. You'd feel weak and dizzy as your blood volume drops. Your tissues would temporarily have reduced oxygen delivery. Your body would be caught in a bind. Your thick blood is dangerous, but removing it makes you feel terrible. Exercise capacity would be severely limited during the readaptation period. Your cardiovascular system is already weakened from years in reduced gravity. Your respiratory system is calibrated for the wrong atmosphere. Your blood chemistry is wrong. Trying to do any physical activity would leave you gasping and exhausted. Simple tasks like climbing stairs would feel like running a marathon. Your muscles would be screaming for oxygen that your compromised cardiorespiratory system struggles to deliver efficiently. Long-term lung damage is a real possibility. Years of breathing higher oxygen concentrations could cause cumulative oxidative damage to lung tissue. Studies of premature infants who received supplemental oxygen show increased rates of chronic lung disease decades later. The oxygen-rich atmosphere you breathed on Mars might leave you with reduced lung capacity, scarring, or increased susceptibility to respiratory infections for the rest of your life. Another concern is the changed lung surfactant, the substance that coats alveoli and prevents them from collapsing. Surfactant composition and production rates are influenced by atmospheric conditions. After years on Mars, your surfactant system would be adapted to the habitat atmosphere. On Earth, with different pressure and gas composition, your surfactant might not work as effectively. This could lead to atelectasis, partial lung collapse, or difficulty breathing that persists even after other aspects of readaptation are complete. Sleep apnea and other breathing disorders could develop or worsen. The neural control of breathing during sleep is particularly sensitive to atmospheric conditions. The changed respiratory drive from years on Mars might cause your breathing to stop periodically during sleep, depriving your brain of oxygen. You'd wake up repeatedly, never achieving deep restorative sleep. The resulting chronic sleep deprivation would compound all your other health problems. Pharmaceutical interventions would be limited and imperfect. Bronchodilators could help with airway resistance, but don't address the fundamental mismatch between your adapted respiratory system and Earth's atmosphere. Supplemental oxygen might help during the worst of the readaptation, but can't be used indefinitely. Blood thinners could reduce clotting risk from thick blood, but increase bleeding risk. There's no drug that resets your respiratory system to Earth normal after years of Mars adaptation. The psychological burden would be crushing. Breathing is normally automatic, something you don't think about. When every breath requires conscious attention, when you're constantly fighting the sensation that you can't breathe properly, the anxiety is overwhelming. Some returning colonists might develop panic attacks triggered by the feeling that they're suffocating even when their oxygen levels are fine. The mental health impact of respiratory dysregulation would affect quality of life as much as the physical symptoms. Sensory recalibration and perceptual distortion. Human perception isn't a direct recording of reality. Your brain constantly interprets sensory signals based on learned expectations from a lifetime of Earth experience. Vision, hearing, balance, touch, temperature sensation, and even your sense of body position in space all depend on neural processing calibrated for Earth-specific conditions. Mars would force your sensory systems to recalibrate completely. After years of adapting to Martian conditions, returning to Earth would mean your senses would misinterpret everything. The world would look wrong, sound wrong, and feel wrong because your perceptual systems have been reprogrammed for an alien environment. Start with vision. Mars receives only 43% of the sunlight that Earth does, because it's 50% farther from the Sun. The maximum brightness on Mars is roughly equivalent to late afternoon on an overcast day on Earth. Your eyes would adapt to these lower light levels through multiple mechanisms. The pupil would dilate more, letting in more light. The photoreceptor cells in your retina would become more sensitive, amplifying weak signals. The visual cortex would adjust its processing to extract more information from dimmer images. After months on Mars, your vision would be optimized for the planet's perpetual twilight. Inside Mars habitats, lighting would come from LEDs or other artificial sources. These lights would likely differ from sunlight in spectrum, flicker rate, and intensity. Your visual system would adapt to these specific characteristics. The color perception centers in your brain would recalibrate to the light spectrum you're exposed to daily. What looks white or natural to you would shift based on your habitual lighting environment. Earth's brightness would be painful when you return. Your eyes, adapted to Mars's dimness, would be overwhelmed by full sunlight. You'd need to wear very dark sunglasses constantly, not as a fashion choice, but as medical necessity. Even indoor lighting might seem too bright. You might need to live in dimly lit environments for weeks or months, while your eyes slowly readapt. Some aspects of the adaptation might be permanent. Your sensitivity to bright light could remain elevated for life. Color perception would be particularly strange. Earth's colors would seem oversaturated, almost garish. The deep blue sky, bright green vegetation, and vivid colors of flowers and objects would be visually shocking after years of seeing only the browns, reds, and artificial colors of Mars. Your brain might even struggle to process these colors correctly at first. Some returning colonists might experience color distortions where blues appear wrong or greens don't look natural. The vestibular system presents an even more profound challenge. Your inner ear contains the semicircular canals and otolith organs that detect head rotation and linear acceleration. These organs work by sensing the movement of fluid and tiny calcium carbonate crystals in response to motion and gravity. The signal they send depends on the strength of gravity. In Mars's 0.38 grams, every head movement produces a smaller signal than the same movement on Earth. Your brain learns to interpret these signals through a lifetime of experience. By adulthood, the relationship between vestibular signals and head movement is deeply ingrained in your neural processing. On Mars, this relationship would break down immediately. At first, you'd experience motion sickness as your brain receives signals that don't match its expectations. But within weeks, your brain would begin recalibrating. The neural circuits processing vestibular information would adjust their interpretation to match Martian gravity. After years on Mars, your vestibular system would be completely adapted to 0.38 G. Returning to Earth would create a massive sensory conflict. Your vestibular organs would send signals 2.6 times stronger than your brain expects for any given head movement. The result would be severe vertigo, a spinning or tilting sensation even when you're perfectly still. Nausea and vomiting would be constant. You might be unable to move your head without triggering overwhelming dizziness. This vestibular confusion would make balance nearly impossible. Walking requires constant vestibular input to maintain upright posture. With your vestibular system sending wrong signals, you'd stagger like you're drunk. Falls would be frequent. Some returning colonists might be unable to walk at all for the first weeks on Earth, requiring wheelchairs until their vestibular system partially recalibrates. Proprioception, your sense of body position and movement, depends on receptors in muscles, tendons, and joints that measure tension and position. These receptors have been signaling your brain about forces and positions in Earth's gravity your entire life. On Mars, the same receptors would send different signals because everything is lighter. Your brain would need to relearn the relationship between proprioceptive signals and actual body position. This recalibration would be thorough and deep. After years on Mars, your motor cortex would have new internal models of movement calibrated for Martian physics. Your cerebellum would have updated its coordination algorithms. Your entire sensorimotor system would be built around the assumption that you're operating in 0.38 G. Returning to Earth would break all these models simultaneously. Simple actions would become impossibly difficult. Reaching for a cup would consistently undershoot because your brain expects objects to be heavier. Walking would feel like wading through molasses because your muscles aren't activating hard enough. Your handwriting would be tiny and weak because you're not pressing down adequately. Hugging someone could be dangerous because you might squeeze far too gently, or overcompensating too hard and cause injury. The psychological impact of losing sensory reliability would be profound. Humans depend on their senses to understand reality. When your senses all tell you things that are wrong, when you can't trust your own perception, it creates a deep existential anxiety. Some returning colonists might develop depersonalization or derealization, feelings of being detached from their body or from reality. The world would feel dreamlike and unreal because all sensory input is subtly or grossly wrong. Auditory changes would be more subtle, but still present. Sound travels differently in Mars's thin atmosphere and in habitats with different air pressure and composition. The acoustic properties would affect how sounds echo, reverberate, and attenuate. After years on Mars, your auditory system would learn these acoustic properties. Sounds would seem to come from slightly wrong directions on Earth. Distances would be hard to judge by sound. Familiar sounds would seem distorted. Touch and pressure sensitivity would be recalibrated for Mars's reduced gravity. On Mars, objects weigh 62% less than on Earth. The pressure sensations from handling objects, the weight of your own limbs, the feeling of your body against a chair, all would be different. Your tactile system would adapt. On Earth, everything would feel too heavy, too hard, too much. The light touch you learned on Mars would be inadequate for manipulating Earth objects. Temperature sensation might be permanently altered. Mars's extreme cold and the different thermal properties of spacesuits and habitat materials would change your perception of hot and cold. You might find Earth's comfortable temperatures uncomfortably warm or cold. Your thermoregulatory responses, which depend partly on temperature sensation, would trigger at inappropriate times, making you sweat when you're not actually overheating, or shiver when you're not actually cold. Rehabilitation would require intensive sensory retraining, similar to therapy for stroke victims who've lost sensory processing abilities. You'd need to practice movements repeatedly until your brain relearns Earth physics. You'd need vestibular rehabilitation exercises to help your balance system recalibrate. You'd need vision therapy to adjust to Earth's brightness and colours. But unlike stroke rehabilitation, where the goal is recovering lost function, you'd be trying to overwrite years of Mars-adapted function with relearned Earth function. The brain doesn't easily undo deep adaptations. Some people would adapt faster than others based on neuroplasticity. Younger colonists with more flexible brains might readjust in months. Older adults with reduced neuroplasticity might take years or never fully readjust. Some might remain permanently perceptually impaired, living the rest of their lives with sensory systems that never quite work right on Earth. They'd be functional, but always slightly off, always having to consciously correct for their Mars-calibrated senses. Thermal regulation and metabolic collapse. Temperature regulation is one of the most fundamental physiological functions. Your body must maintain a core temperature near 37 degrees Celsius despite environmental temperature variations. This regulation involves complex interactions between your nervous system, circulatory system, endocrine system, and skin. The mechanisms evolved specifically for Earth's thermal environment. Mars presents radically different thermal challenges that would force your temperature regulation system to adapt in ways that make Earth's climate difficult or impossible to handle safely. Mars is cold. The average surface temperature is -63 degrees Celsius. Temperatures at the equator can reach a comfortable 20 degrees Celsius during summer afternoons, but they plunge to -73 degrees Celsius at night. The poles see temperatures as low as -125 degrees Celsius. This temperature variation, over 140 degrees in some locations, is far more extreme than anything on Earth, except perhaps some Antarctic locations. The thermal environment is complicated by Mars's thin atmosphere. With only 1% of Earth's atmospheric pressure, convective heat transfer is minimal. Air doesn't carry heat away from your body effectively. This has counterintuitive effects. In thin atmosphere, hot days don't feel as hot as the same temperature on Earth because convection doesn't heat you as effectively. But cold is more dangerous because your body heat doesn't transfer to surrounding air efficiently, making it easier to develop cold spots. Mars habitats would maintain comfortable temperatures, likely around 20 to 22 degrees Celsius, similar to Earth buildings. But the work of maintaining your body temperature would be different. The lower humidity, different air composition, and altered convective properties would affect heat exchange between your body and environment. Your thermoregulatory system would need to calibrate to these new conditions. Spacesuits present unique thermal challenges. They must protect you from temperature extremes while also managing the heat your body produces. Human metabolism generates about 100 watts at rest, more during activity. In Mars's thin atmosphere, this heat can't escape through convection. Spacesuits need active cooling systems to prevent dangerous overheating. You'd be simultaneously experiencing extreme external cold while generating internal heat that can't easily dissipate. This thermal paradox would train your thermoregulatory system in strange ways. Your hypothalamus acts as your body's thermostat. It receives temperature information from sensors throughout your body and triggers responses to warm you up or cool you down. These responses include shivering to generate heat, sweating to cool through evaporation, adjusting blood flow to skin to control heat loss, and changing metabolic rate. All these responses would be calibrated through experience. Years on Mars would reset your hypothalamic set points to match Martian conditions. Sweating would work differently on Mars. In habitats with lower atmospheric pressure, sweat would evaporate more quickly, potentially leading to over-effective cooling. Your body might reduce sweat production to compensate, or the altered humidity levels might affect sweat evaporation rate. Either way, your sweating response would recalibrate. This matters enormously when you return to Earth. Earth's temperature and humidity combinations would feel completely wrong. What Earth natives consider comfortable room temperature might feel stiflingly hot or uncomfortably cold to you. High humidity, common in many Earth climates, would be particularly challenging. After years in Mars's extremely dry environment, humid air would feel oppressive and difficult to breathe. The combination of heat and humidity, dangerous even for Earth-adapted people, could be deadly for you if your thermoregulatory responses don't function properly. Exercise in Earth's climate could trigger dangerous hypothermia. Your cooling mechanisms, calibrated for Mars, might be inadequate for Earth conditions. When you exercise, your muscles generate heat that must be dissipated. If your body doesn't sweat enough, or if the sweat doesn't evaporate effectively because your skin blood flow is wrong, your core temperature would rise rapidly. Heat stroke causes confusion, organ damage, and death. You might need to avoid any strenuous activity on Earth or only exercise in carefully controlled cool environments. Cold tolerance would also be unpredictable. If Mars's extreme cold exposure enhanced your cold tolerance mechanisms, you might be resistant to Earth's moderate cold. But enhanced cold tolerance often comes with reduced heat tolerance. You can't be optimized for both extremes simultaneously. Or if you spent most of your time in heated habitats, you might have lost cold tolerance, making Earth winters dangerous despite being much warmer than Mars. Blood flow control to skin is crucial for temperature regulation. When you're hot, blood vessels in your skin dilate, bringing warm blood to the surface where heat can radiate away. When you're cold, these vessels constrict, keeping warm blood in your core. After years on Mars, this vasodilation and vasoconstriction control would be recalibrated. On Earth, your blood vessels might dilate or constrict at wrong times, making you feel uncomfortably hot or cold, regardless of actual temperature. Brown adipose tissue, a special type of fat that generates heat, is more active in people regularly exposed to cold. Mars colonists might develop increased brown fat to help manage cold exposure during surface activities. But this enhanced thermogenesis might make Earth temperatures feel too warm. You'd be generating extra heat that's appropriate for Mars but excessive on Earth, leaving you constantly feeling overheated. Metabolic rate, the speed at which your body burns energy, affects heat production. Your basal metabolic rate might shift on Mars depending on physical activity levels, diet, and environmental demands. A lower metabolic rate means less heat production, potentially making you feel cold easily. A higher rate means more heat production, potentially making heat dissipation difficult. Either way, the mismatch between your Mars-adapted metabolism and Earth's thermal environment would cause problems. Circadian temperature rhythm would add another layer of complication. Body temperature normally varies by about 0.5 degrees Celsius over 24 hours, lowest in early morning, highest in late afternoon. This rhythm is part of your circadian system. Mars's 24.6-hour day would disrupt this rhythm. When you return to Earth, your circadian system would already be damaged, and the temperature component of circadian rhythms would be particularly dysfunctional, making temperature regulation even more difficult. Age and sex affect thermoregulation. Women typically have slightly different temperature regulation than men, with more cyclical variation related to menstrual cycles. Older adults have impaired thermoregulation compared to young adults. These individual differences would interact with Mars adaptation in unpredictable ways. An older female colonist would face different thermal readjustment challenges than a young male, and we have no data on these variations because no one has done this before. Medical management of thermal dysregulation would be difficult. There aren't drugs that reset your hypothalamic thermostat. You'd need to live in carefully controlled thermal environments, possibly using heating or cooling garments to maintain comfortable body temperature. Avoiding extremes would be necessary, which means limited outdoor activities. No beach visits, no winter sports, no tropical vacations. Your life would be thermally constrained, always needing to manage environmental temperature to avoid dangerous hyper or hypothermia. The psychological burden would be significant, never feeling thermally comfortable, always being too hot or too cold, needing constant environmental control just to feel okay. This might seem like a minor problem compared to other health issues, but chronic thermal discomfort is incredibly annoying and affects quality of life substantially. You'd be irritable, uncomfortable, and frustrated all the time, unable to enjoy normal Earth activities because the temperature always feels wrong. Hormonal cascade and endocrine failure. The endocrine system is a network of glands producing hormones that regulate virtually every bodily function. These chemical messengers control metabolism, growth, reproduction, stress response, sleep, mood, immune function, bone density, and much more. The endocrine system operates through intricate feedback loops that maintain homeostasis. Mars's hostile environment would disrupt these delicate balances profoundly. Chronic stress, altered light cycles, reduced gravity, radiation exposure, and nutritional limitations would cause hormone dysregulation that persists long after returning to Earth, potentially leaving you with permanent endocrine dysfunction. The hypothalamic pituitary axis is the master control system. The hypothalamus, a small brain region, responds to environmental signals and internal body state by releasing hormones that control the pituitary gland. The pituitary then releases hormones that regulate other endocrine glands throughout your body. This cascading control system allows your brain to coordinate hormonal responses to changing conditions. But it evolved for Earth conditions and would struggle to maintain proper regulation on Mars. Cortisol is perhaps the most problematic hormone in this scenario. Produced by your adrenal glands in response to stress, cortisol helps mobilize energy, suppress inflammation, and prepare your body for threats. Acute cortisol elevation is beneficial for handling short-term stress, but Mars would create chronic stress that never lets up. Equipment failures could kill you. The habitat could breach. Life support could fail. You're isolated, confined, and completely dependent on technology to survive. This constant background threat would keep cortisol chronically elevated. The effects of chronic cortisol elevation are devastating. It suppresses immune function, making infections more likely and more severe. It causes bone loss by inhibiting osteoblast activity and enhancing osteoclast activity, accelerating the skeletal deterioration already caused by low gravity. It impairs memory and cognitive function by damaging the hippocampus. It disrupts sleep despite causing fatigue. It causes insulin resistance, increasing diabetes risk. It elevates blood pressure, straining your already compromised cardiovascular system. Long-term cortisol elevation also breaks down the very system that's supposed to control it. The hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis normally operates on negative feedback. High cortisol signals the hypothalamus and pituitary to reduce ACTH production, which tells the adrenals to produce less cortisol. But chronic stress can damage this feedback system. The glucocorticoid receptors that detect cortisol become less sensitive. Your body requires higher and higher cortisol levels to achieve the same effects. Or the feedback breaks completely, causing wildly fluctuating cortisol that's sometimes too high and sometimes too low. Thyroid hormones control metabolic rate, protein synthesis, body temperature, and energy production. The thyroid gland responds to TSH from the pituitary. This system is remarkably sensitive to stress, illness, and environmental change. Studies show that astronauts often experience thyroid dysfunction during spaceflight. Some develop subclinical hypothyroidism with low normal thyroid hormone levels. Others show altered TSH responses. On Mars, thyroid problems could develop from multiple causes. The stress might suppress thyroid function through effects on the hypothalamic pituitary axis. Radiation could damage the thyroid gland directly. It's one of the more radiosensitive tissues. Nutritional deficiencies, particularly iodine, could impair thyroid hormone synthesis. After years on Mars, you might develop overt hypothyroidism with fatigue, weight gain, cold intolerance, depression, and cognitive slowing. Or hypothyroidism with anxiety, weight loss, heat intolerance, and cardiac problems. Growth hormone, despite its name, is important throughout life, not just during childhood. Adults need it for muscle maintenance, bone health, cognitive function, and overall vitality. Growth hormone is released primarily during deep sleep. The sleep disruption from Mars's altered day length and chronic stress would reduce growth hormone production. This would compound muscle and bone loss, impair cognitive recovery, and accelerate aging. Sex hormones would be profoundly affected. In women, the stress and physical demands could disrupt the hypothalamic pituitary ovarian axis that controls menstrual cycles. The condition functional hypothalamic amenorrhea, where periods stop due to stress or low body weight, is common in female athletes and could affect many Mars colonists. Estrogen levels would drop, causing not just fertility issues, but also accelerating bone loss, increasing cardiovascular disease risk, and potentially triggering early menopause. Progesterone, the other main female sex hormone, follows similar patterns. Low progesterone contributes to bone loss and mood disturbances. The cyclical nature of female hormones means disruption affects not just reproduction, but overall health and well-being. Hormone replacement therapy could help, but it's tricky to manage long-term and carries risks, including increased blood clot risk, which is already elevated on Mars. In men, testosterone production could decline significantly. Chronic stress, sleep disruption, and physical challenges all suppress testosterone. Lower testosterone accelerates muscle loss, reduces bone density, causes erectile dysfunction, decreases libido, and contributes to depression and cognitive problems. The combination of low gravity muscle atrophy and low testosterone would be particularly devastating for maintaining muscle mass and strength. Sperm production would be impaired by radiation exposure, heat from spacesuits, stress, and hormonal disruption. Sperm counts could drop dramatically. The remaining sperm might have genetic damage from radiation exposure. Male fertility could be severely compromised or lost entirely. Even if testosterone levels were artificially maintained through hormone replacement, sperm production might not recover. The question of reproduction after Mars becomes ethically complex. Beyond the hormone problems, there's the radiation-induced genetic damage to consider. Both eggs and sperm would have accumulated mutations. The risk of birth defects would be substantially elevated. Some countries might even restrict reproduction for returning Mars colonists due to genetic damage concerns. The decision to have children would involve serious ethical considerations about passing on potentially damaged DNA. Melatonin, the sleep hormone produced by your pineal gland in response to darkness, would be disrupted by Mars's day length and artificial lighting. Melatonin doesn't just promote sleep, it's also a powerful antioxidant and immune modulator. Disrupted melatonin production contributes to sleep problems while also reducing your body's defenses against oxidative stress and infection. The cumulative effects would accelerate aging and disease. Insulin and glucagon, which regulate blood sugar, would be stressed by altered diet, activity patterns, circadian disruption, and cortisol elevation. Insulin resistance could develop, where cells become less responsive to insulin signal to take up glucose. This leads to elevated blood sugar and eventually type 2 diabetes. Mars colonists would face high diabetes risk from multiple converging factors. Parathyroid hormone regulates calcium levels. With massive calcium release from dissolving bones, your parathyroid glands would struggle to manage the flood. They might become overactive, developing primary hyperparathyroidism. This causes continued bone loss even beyond what gravity would cause, kidney stones, fatigue, depression, and cognitive problems. The parathyroid glands might become autonomously hyperactive, continuing to overproduce hormone even after you return to Earth. Adipose tissue isn't just fat storage, it's an endocrine organ producing hormones like leptin and adiponectin. Leptin signals your brain about energy stores and regulates appetite and metabolism. Adiponectin affects insulin sensitivity and inflammation. Changes in body composition on Mars would alter these hormones, potentially causing metabolic dysregulation that persists after return. Returning to Earth wouldn't restore normal endocrine function automatically. The hormone disruptions, especially to the master regulatory systems, could persist for years or permanently. You might need multiple hormone replacements: thyroid hormone, sex hormones, possibly growth hormone or cortisol modulation. But endocrine systems are interconnected. Giving one hormone affects others. Managing multiple hormone replacements simultaneously is extremely complex, and achieving natural hormone patterns is essentially impossible. The quality of life impact would be severe. Hormones affect how you feel moment to moment. Fatigue from thyroid problems, mood swings from sex hormone imbalances, anxiety from cortisol dysregulation, poor sleep from melatonin disruption. You'd feel unwell in ways that are hard to describe, but impossible to ignore. Despite testing and treatment, you might never feel truly healthy again. The Mars mission would have permanently disrupted your body's chemical messaging system, leaving you physiologically damaged for life. Renal dysfunction and urological damage. Your kidneys are remarkable organs that filter your entire blood volume about 50 times per day. They remove waste products, regulate fluid balance, control blood pressure, maintain electrolyte concentrations, and produce hormones that affect red blood cell production and bone health. These paired organs receive roughly 20% of your cardiac output, despite representing less than 1% of body weight. This extraordinary blood flow is necessary for their filtering function, but it also makes them vulnerable to damage from altered blood flow patterns, toxic substances, and radiation. Mars would subject your kidneys to years of abuse that could cause irreversible damage, potentially leaving you dependent on dialysis or needing transplantation after returning to Earth. The immediate kidney problem on Mars would be the massive calcium load from bone dissolution. As your skeleton breaks down in reduced gravity, calcium floods into your bloodstream at rates far exceeding normal. Your kidneys must excrete this excess calcium to maintain safe blood levels. But high urinary calcium concentration creates ideal conditions for kidney stone formation. Calcium combines with oxalate or phosphate in urine to form crystals. These crystals can grow into stones ranging from tiny grains to large masses several centimeters across. Kidney stones are among the most painful medical conditions humans experience. The pain is described as excruciating, worse than childbirth, comparable to being stabbed repeatedly. When a stone moves through the ureter, the narrow tube from kidney to bladder, it causes waves of agonizing pain, accompanied by nausea, vomiting, and blood in the urine. The pain can be so severe that people pass out or go into shock. The incidence of kidney stones in astronauts is substantially elevated compared to Earth populations. Studies estimate that 10 to 20% of people on multi-year Mars missions would develop stones. That means in a crew of 10 colonists, 1 or 2 would likely experience this medical emergency at some point. The timing is unpredictable. A stone could form slowly over months, then suddenly begin moving, incapacitating the colonist without warning. Treatment options on Mars would be primitive compared to Earth. Hospitals use extracorporeal shockwave lithotripsy, which breaks stones apart with sound waves. Or ureteroscopy, threading a camera and tools up through the bladder to remove stones. Or percutaneous nephrolithotomy, surgically entering the kidney to remove large stones. Mars would lack this sophisticated equipment. Treatment might be limited to pain management with whatever medications are available and hoping the stone passes naturally. Some stones are too large to pass. They lodge in the ureter, blocking urine flow. This causes hydronephrosis, where urine backs up into the kidney. The kidney swells painfully. If untreated for days, the back pressure causes permanent kidney damage. If infection develops in the obstructed kidney, the result is pyonephrosis, pus filling the kidney. This is life-threatening and requires surgical drainage. A colonist with an obstructing stone and no way to remove it could lose kidney function or die from infection. The dehydration risk on Mars compounds the stone problem significantly. Water is precious on Mars, produced from either subsurface ice or atmospheric processing. Both methods are energy-intensive. Water would be carefully rationed. Colonists might receive just enough water for basic hydration, but not optimal amounts. Chronic mild dehydration is likely. This concentrates urine, making it more likely that minerals will precipitate into crystals and stones. Studies on Earth show that people in hot, dry climates have much higher kidney stone rates because mild chronic dehydration concentrates their urine. The same mechanism would operate on Mars. Colonists might be unknowingly predisposing themselves to stones by not drinking enough water. But asking people to drink more water when supplies are limited creates impossible choices. Do you use precious water for stone prevention or reserve it for other critical needs? Beyond stones, the kidneys would suffer direct damage from multiple sources. Radiation exposure damages kidney cells and blood vessels. The kidneys are moderately radiosensitive. Chronic radiation exposure causes progressive kidney injury through several mechanisms. It damages the endothelial cells lining blood vessels, causing them to become inflamed and scarred. It directly kills kidney tubule cells that filter blood. It causes oxidative damage that accumulates over time. Studies of cancer patients who received abdominal radiation therapy show that radiation nephropathy, kidney damage from radiation, can develop years after exposure. The damage is progressive and irreversible. Kidney function gradually declines. Eventually, patients may need dialysis or transplantation. Mars colonists would receive similar cumulative radiation doses over years. The risk of radiation nephropathy would be substantial. The altered gravity affects kidney function through changes in blood flow and fluid distribution. In reduced gravity, fluid shifts toward the head and chest. This changes the pressure gradients that drive kidney filtration. The glomeruli, microscopic filtering units in kidneys, depend on specific pressure differences between incoming blood and the filtrate being produced. Altered pressures could reduce filtration efficiency or change which molecules are filtered. Studies of astronauts show changes in kidney function during spaceflight. The renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system, which regulates blood pressure and fluid balance through kidney control, becomes dysregulated. Electrolyte handling changes. These adaptations help astronauts function in altered gravity, but may cause long-term kidney damage through mechanisms we don't fully understand. Medications used on Mars could contribute to kidney damage. Many commonly used drugs are nephrotoxic. Non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs like ibuprofen can damage kidneys with long-term use. Certain antibiotics are nephrotoxic. Contrast dyes used for medical imaging can cause acute kidney injury. With limited medical resources, Mars colonists might have to use nephrotoxic drugs frequently because safer alternatives aren't available. The cumulative effect could be significant kidney damage. Chronic kidney disease develops slowly and often asymptomatically. Kidneys have remarkable reserve capacity. You can lose 50 to 75% of kidney function before symptoms appear. By the time you notice fatigue, nausea, swelling, changes in urination and other symptoms, the damage is severe and largely irreversible. Regular monitoring of kidney function would be essential on Mars, but treatment options for declining function would be limited. Returning to Earth with compromised kidneys would be extremely dangerous. The journey home in zero gravity would worsen fluid and electrolyte imbalances. Your damaged kidneys would struggle to maintain proper blood chemistry during months of spaceflight. Landing on Earth subjects your body to sudden full gravity. Blood flow patterns change abruptly. Blood pressure spikes. Your weakened kidneys might fail completely under this stress. Acute kidney injury, sudden loss of kidney function, is a medical emergency requiring immediate intensive care. Dialysis may be necessary to remove waste products and excess fluid that kidneys can't handle. Without dialysis, waste products accumulate in blood, causing uremia. This causes confusion, seizures, coma, and death. Even if you survive acute kidney injury, the kidneys may never fully recover. Some patients remain dialysis dependent permanently. If you develop chronic kidney disease on Mars that progresses after returning to Earth, your life would be fundamentally changed. Advanced chronic kidney disease requires dietary restrictions limiting protein, phosphorus, potassium, and sodium. Many foods become forbidden. You'd need frequent medical monitoring. Eventually, you'd need dialysis or transplantation. Dialysis is life-sustaining, but life-limiting. Hemodialysis requires sitting connected to a machine for 3 to 5 hours, 3 times per week. During treatment, your blood is pumped out, filtered through an artificial membrane, and returned. It's exhausting. You feel wiped out for hours after each session. Between sessions, waste products and fluid accumulate, making you feel progressively worse. Your diet is severely restricted. Your life revolves around dialysis schedules. Peritoneal dialysis is an alternative where fluid is infused into your abdominal cavity, left to absorb waste products, then drained out. This can be done at home and offers more flexibility than hemodialysis, but it requires having a permanent catheter in your abdomen, carries infection risk, and still requires dialysis exchanges 4 to 6 times daily. It's less efficient than hemodialysis, so dietary restrictions are still necessary. Kidney transplantation might be the best option, but transplants have their own challenges. The surgery is major. Recovery takes months. You need to take immunosuppressive drugs for life to prevent rejection. These drugs make you vulnerable to infections and increase cancer risk. Given that Mars returnees already have compromised immune systems and elevated cancer risk from radiation, immunosuppression could be dangerous or even fatal. Transplant organs are scarce. Waiting lists are long. You might wait years for a kidney while on dialysis. Some people die waiting. Mars returnees would compete for organs with other patients whose kidney failure isn't self-inflicted through voluntary participation in dangerous missions. Some organ allocation systems might even penalize Mars returnees, considering their kidney failure a consequence of their own choices. The ethical questions are uncomfortable. Should society bear the medical costs of treating Mars returnees whose kidney failure resulted from voluntary decisions to go to Mars? Should scarce transplant organs go to Mars returnees? These aren't hypothetical questions. With limited medical resources, someone has to decide priorities. Mars returnees might find themselves at the bottom of priority lists. Prevention of kidney damage on Mars would require measures that might not be feasible. Very high fluid intake would dilute urine and reduce stone risk, but water availability might be too limited. Medications like potassium citrate can reduce stone formation, but long-term use has side effects. Limiting dietary oxalate helps prevent calcium oxalate stones, but food choices on Mars would already be limited. Shielding from radiation would help prevent radiation nephropathy, but adequate shielding is heavy and expensive. The reality is that some degree of kidney damage would be nearly inevitable for long-term Mars colonists. The question isn't whether kidneys will be damaged, but how severely. Some colonists might maintain adequate function despite some injury. Others might lose so much function that they need dialysis or transplantation. The variation would depend on individual susceptibility, random chance of stone formation, radiation exposure, and countless other factors. But everyone going to Mars should understand that they're gambling with their kidney health, and the odds aren't good. Oral and dental deterioration. Dental health might seem trivial compared to cardiovascular or neurological problems, but oral health is intimately connected to overall health, and Mars would cause dental problems that range from uncomfortable to life-threatening. The combination of altered saliva production, jawbone density loss, dietary limitations, difficulty maintaining hygiene, and absence of professional dental care would lead to cavities, gum disease, tooth loss, and potentially dangerous oral infections. Returning to Earth with severely compromised oral health would require extensive painful dental work, and some damage might be irreparable. Saliva is crucial for oral health in ways most people never consider. It neutralizes acids produced by bacteria. It washes away food particles. It provides antimicrobial proteins that kill bacteria. It supplies minerals that repair tooth enamel. Normal saliva flow is about 1 to 1.5 litres per day. Studies of astronauts show that saliva production changes in altered gravity. Some report dry mouth. Saliva may become thicker or thinner. The composition might change, affecting its protective properties. The mechanism behind altered saliva production likely involves fluid shifts. In reduced gravity, fluid moves toward the head and chest. This might affect blood flow to salivary glands or change the neural and hormonal signals that regulate saliva production. Whatever the mechanism, altered saliva means reduced oral protection. Your mouth becomes more vulnerable to cavities and gum disease. The dry feeling is uncomfortable and makes eating and speaking more difficult. Jaw bones would lose density like all bones in reduced gravity. Your upper jaw, the maxilla, and lower jaw, the mandible, are bones that anchor your teeth. Teeth sit in sockets in these bones, held in place by periodontal ligaments. As jaw bone density declines, these sockets become less secure. The bone around tooth roots thins and weakens. Teeth can become loose, shifting position, or even falling out as the supporting bone dissolves. This is similar to what happens in severe periodontal disease on Earth, but on Mars it would occur even without infection. The mechanical process of bone loss in reduced gravity would undermine tooth stability. Some colonists might lose teeth not from cavities or gum disease, but simply because the jawbone can't hold them anymore. The psychological impact of losing teeth in your 30s or 40s would be devastating. The diet on Mars would be problematic for dental health. Food variety would be extremely limited. Crops grown hydroponically might be carbohydrate heavy to provide adequate calories in limited space. Carbohydrates break down into sugars that oral bacteria metabolize, producing acids that dissolve tooth enamel. A high carbohydrate diet means more acid exposure, more enamel demineralization, more cavities. Fresh fruits and vegetables that naturally clean teeth would be scarce. Crunchy foods like apples and carrots mechanically remove plaque. Fibrous vegetables stimulate saliva flow. Without these, plaque builds up faster. The sticky processed foods that might be common on Mars would adhere to teeth, providing sustained fuel for bacteria. Your teeth would be bathed in acids for hours after eating. Water fluoridation, a major public health success on Earth, might not be feasible on Mars. Fluoride strengthens tooth enamel and helps prevent cavities. Most developed countries add fluoride to drinking water at about 1 part per million. But Mars water would come from ice processing or atmospheric extraction, then recycled repeatedly through closed-loop systems. Adding fluoride to this system might be impractical or could interfere with other processes. Without fluoridated water, enamel would be more vulnerable to decay. Fluoride toothpaste would help, but it's less effective than constant low-level fluoride exposure from water. Colonists would be at substantially higher cavity risk than Earth populations with fluoridated water. Given all the other oral health challenges, this could be the factor that tips many people into serious dental problems. Oral hygiene would be difficult to maintain. Water is precious on Mars and would be rationed. Long showers where you can leisurely brush teeth wouldn't exist. You might need to brush with minimal water, using just a small cup or even waterless methods. Flossing, already neglected by many people on Earth despite its importance, might fall by the wayside when you're exhausted from survival work and can barely spare water for brushing. The lack of professional dental care is perhaps the most critical factor. On Earth, dentists perform routine cleanings to remove tartar buildup that brushing can't eliminate. They catch cavities when they're small and easy to fill. They treat early gum disease before it becomes severe. They provide fluoride treatments and sealants that prevent decay. On Mars, none of this would be available. Small dental problems would progress to major ones. A small cavity that would be a simple 20-minute filling on Earth would grow, penetrating deeper into the tooth. Eventually, it would reach the pulp chamber containing nerves and blood vessels. At this point, you'd experience severe pain as bacteria infect the pulp. The infection could form an abscess, a collection of pus at the tooth root. Dental abscesses are excruciatingly painful and potentially life-threatening. The infection can spread to surrounding tissues, causing facial swelling, difficulty swallowing, and difficulty breathing if the swelling is severe. Bacteria can enter the bloodstream, causing sepsis, a life-threatening whole-body infection. Historical accounts before modern dentistry describe people dying from dental abscesses. On Mars, without proper treatment capability, dental infections could again become deadly. Treatment for an abscessed tooth requires either root canal therapy or extraction. Root canals involve removing infected pulp, cleaning and disinfecting the inside of the tooth, and sealing it. This requires specialized equipment, training, and materials that wouldn't be available on Mars. Extraction is simpler, but still requires proper anesthetic, instruments, and skill to avoid complications. Extracting a tooth on Mars could be nightmarish. Without adequate local anesthetic, the pain would be extreme. Teeth are held in place by surprisingly strong periodontal ligaments and may need significant force to remove. Breaking the tooth during extraction, leaving fragments behind, or damaging adjacent teeth are all possible complications. Excessive bleeding, infection, or injury to the jawbone could occur. The psychological trauma would be severe. Gum disease, periodontal disease, would be endemic among Mars colonists. It begins with gingivitis, inflammation of the gums from bacterial plaque buildup. Gums become red, swollen, and bleed easily. If untreated, it progresses to periodontitis, where infection extends below the gum line, destroying the ligaments and bone supporting teeth. Pockets form between teeth and gums, harboring more bacteria. Eventually, teeth become loose and fall out. On Earth, with good oral hygiene and professional care, periodontal disease is preventable and treatable. On Mars, with limited hygiene capability and no professional care, it would progress unchecked in many colonists. Studies show that stress and weakened immune systems, both guaranteed on Mars, accelerate periodontal disease progression. The combination of factors would create perfect conditions for severe gum disease. Periodontal disease isn't just an oral problem. It's linked to cardiovascular disease, diabetes, respiratory infections, and adverse pregnancy outcomes through mechanisms involving chronic inflammation and bacteria entering the bloodstream. Mars colonists with severe periodontal disease would face elevated risk for these systemic conditions on top of their other health problems. The pain from dental problems would severely impact quality of life. Toothaches rank among the worst pains humans experience. The pain can be constant and throbbing or sharp and stabbing. It interferes with eating, sleeping, concentrating and working. Pain medications might provide temporary relief, but don't address the underlying problem. A colonist with severe dental pain would be unable to function effectively, reducing mission capability and putting others at risk. Returning to Earth with years of accumulated dental problems would require extensive, expensive, painful dental work. Multiple cavities would need filling. Root canals might be necessary for teeth with pulp damage. Periodontal therapy would be needed for gum disease, possibly including gum surgery. Teeth too damaged to save would need extraction, then replacement with implants, bridges or dentures. The cost could easily reach tens of thousands of dollars or more, depending on the extent of damage. Many returning colonists might not be able to afford this care, especially if they're also facing other medical expenses from Mars-induced health problems. They might have to live with dental problems, unable to eat certain foods, self-conscious about their smile, in chronic discomfort. Dental implants, the best replacement for lost teeth, require adequate jawbone density to anchor. The bone loss from Mars might make implants impossible for some colonists. The jawbone would be too thin and weak to hold the implant posts. Bone grafting procedures could build up the jaw, but they're complex, expensive, and require months of healing. Some people might be left with dentures as their only option. Dentures are far from ideal. They don't provide the same chewing efficiency as natural teeth. They can be uncomfortable and may cause sore spots. They need to be removed and cleaned daily. They need periodic adjustment and eventual replacement. Many people find dentures embarrassing and avoid smiling or eating in public. For a Mars returnee to end up with dentures in their 30s or 40s would be a bitter outcome. The psychological impact of dental deterioration would be significant. Your smile is central to your self-image and social interactions. Missing or damaged teeth affect self-esteem and confidence. People with poor dental health often smile less, cover their mouths when talking, and avoid social situations. For Mars, returnees already struggling with psychological adjustment and social reintegration, dental problems would add another barrier to feeling normal. Prevention would require extraordinary discipline, meticulous oral hygiene despite difficult conditions, flossing daily even when exhausted, using fluoride toothpaste and possibly fluoride rinses. Dietary choices that minimize sugar and acid exposure within limited food options. Regular self-examination for problems. But even with perfect compliance, the lack of professional care and the bone loss from reduced gravity would still cause problems. Some colonists might be more susceptible than others based on genetics. People with naturally strong enamel, resistant to cavities, would fare better. Those with genetic predisposition to gum disease would suffer more. But selection of colonists based on dental health wouldn't be perfect. You can't predict who will develop problems on Mars. The dental deterioration would be one more way that Mars damages your body irreversibly, leaving you permanently altered even after returning to Earth. hematological transformation and blood disorders. Blood is far more than a simple transport fluid. It's a complex living tissue containing red cells that carry oxygen, white cells that fight infections, platelets that stop bleeding, and plasma filled with proteins, hormones, nutrients, and countless other molecules. The proportions and functions of blood components are maintained in precise balance. Mars would disrupt this balance through multiple mechanisms, including altered gravity, radiation exposure, changed diet, bone marrow damage, and physiological stress. The resulting blood disorders could range from annoying to life-threatening and might persist permanently after returning to Earth. Red blood cell dynamics would be profoundly altered. These cells are produced in bone marrow at a rate of about 2 million per second to replace old cells that wear out after 120 days. Production is regulated by erythropoietin, a hormone produced by kidneys in response to tissue oxygen levels. The Martian habitat atmosphere, with lower pressure and higher oxygen percentage than Earth, might provide different effective oxygen delivery to tissues, triggering changes in erythropoietin production. If tissues receive less oxygen than optimal, erythropoietin production increases, stimulating bone marrow to make more red cells. Your hematocrit, the percentage of blood volume that's red cells, would rise from normal 40 to 45%, toward 50 to 60% or higher. This polycythemia makes blood thicker and more viscous. Your heart must work harder to pump it. Blood flows more slowly through small vessels. The risk of blood clots increases dramatically. Blood clots are dangerous wherever they form. Deep vein thrombosis in leg veins causes pain and swelling and can break loose, travelling to lungs as pulmonary embolism, often fatal. Clots in brain arteries cause strokes. Clots in coronary arteries cause heart attacks. The thick blood from high hematocrit, combined with cardiovascular changes from reduced gravity, would make Mars colonists prone to clotting disorders. Some might need blood-thinning medications or periodic therapeutic phlebotomy to keep hematocrit in safe ranges. Conversely, if the habitat provides excessive oxygen, erythropoietin might be suppressed, reducing red cell production. Anemia would develop with insufficient oxygen carrying capacity. You'd feel fatigued, weak, short of breath, and unable to perform physical work effectively. Cognitive function would decline. The heart would work harder trying to circulate more blood to compensate for low oxygen content per unit volume. The bone marrow itself would be damaged by radiation exposure. Bone marrow is highly radiosensitive because it contains rapidly dividing cells. Radiation kills these cells or damages their DNA, impairing their ability to produce blood cells. Astronauts on the ISS, protected by Earth's magnetic field and the station's mass, still show changes in blood cell production. Mars colonists, exposed to much higher radiation for years, would suffer substantial bone marrow damage. The result could be pancytopenia, reduced production of all blood cell types. Red cell production would decline, causing anemia. White cell production would drop, weakening immune defences. Platelet production would decrease, impairing clotting and causing easy bruising and bleeding. This combination would leave colonists weak, infection-prone, and at risk for hemorrhage from minor injuries. White blood cell populations would shift in concerning ways. Different white cell types have different functions. Neutrophils, the most numerous, fight bacterial infections by engulfing and destroying bacteria. Lymphocytes include T cells that coordinate immune responses and kill infected cells, B cells that produce antibodies, and natural killer cells that destroy cancer cells and infected cells. Monocytes become macrophages that engulf pathogens and dead cells. Eosinophils and basophils are involved in allergic responses and parasite defense. Studies show that spaceflight alters the balance between these cell types, generally in ways that reduce immune effectiveness. Neutrophil numbers may be normal, but their function impaired. Lymphocyte numbers drop and their activity decreases. T-cell function is particularly affected, with reduced proliferation in response to antigens and altered cytokine production. Natural killer cells become less aggressive at destroying target cells. These changes would make infections more likely and more severe. A bacterial infection that healthy immune systems easily clear might become serious or even life-threatening. Viral infections would be harder to fight off. The constant reactivation of dormant viruses like herpes simplex or varicella zoster would cause recurring problems. Cancer cells, normally destroyed by immune surveillance, might escape detection and grow into tumours. Platelet function, crucial for hemostasis, could be compromised. Platelets are cell fragments that plug damaged blood vessels and trigger the clotting cascade. They must work in careful balance, clotting enough to prevent bleeding, but not so much as to cause thrombosis. Spaceflight studies show changes in platelet activation and the coagulation cascade. Some people develop hypercoagulable states where clots form too easily. Others might have inadequate clotting, leading to bleeding problems. The combination of altered red cells, white cells, and platelets would leave your blood unable to perform its normal functions effectively. Oxygen delivery would be suboptimal. Immune defense would be compromised. Hemostasis would be unreliable. You'd be functionally ill even if you don't have a specific diagnosed disease, just from your blood not working properly. Plasma proteins would change in concentration and function. Albumin, which maintains osmotic pressure and transports many substances, might decrease due to nutritional stress or altered liver function. Immunoglobulins, the antibodies produced by B cells, might decrease in quantity or be less effective. Clotting factors, all produced by liver, could be altered by nutritional deficiencies, particularly vitamin K, or by liver damage from other Mars stresses. The lipid profile in blood would likely shift unfavorably. Chronic stress elevates cortisol, which increases cholesterol and triglyceride production. Altered diet, reduced physical activity, and metabolic changes would push lipid levels toward atherogenic profiles. LDL cholesterol, the bad cholesterol that contributes to arterial plaque formation, would rise. HDL cholesterol, the good cholesterol that removes plaque, would fall. Triglycerides would increase. These lipid changes accelerate atherosclerosis development. Arteries become clogged with cholesterol-containing plaques. Blood flow to vital organs decreases. The risk of heart attacks and strokes rises dramatically. On Mars, with no ability to perform bypass surgery or angioplasty, cardiovascular events would often be fatal. Even if you survive to return to Earth, you might have extensive arterial disease requiring aggressive treatment. Blood glucose regulation would be challenged. The combination of altered circadian rhythms, cortisol elevation, possible insulin resistance, and dietary limitations could cause glucose metabolism problems. Fasting blood glucose might run chronically high, indicating pre-diabetes or diabetes. Hemoglobin A1C, a measure of average blood glucose over 3 months, would creep upward. Or blood glucose might swing wildly between too high and too low, causing cognitive impairment and energy crashes. Type 2 diabetes is a serious chronic disease that accelerates damage to blood vessels, nerves, kidneys, and eyes. It increases heart attack and stroke risk. It causes chronic fatigue and poor wound healing. Mars colonists would face elevated diabetes risk from multiple converging factors. Once developed, diabetes is manageable but not curable. You'd need lifelong medication, dietary modification, and monitoring. Electrolyte concentrations in blood must be tightly controlled. Sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium, chloride, and phosphate all must stay within narrow ranges for proper cell function. The kidney dysfunction, Bone loss releasing calcium, fluid shifts, and altered diet on Mars would constantly push electrolytes out of balance. Monitoring would be necessary, but treatment options would be limited. Even mild electrolyte imbalances cause symptoms. Low sodium causes confusion and fatigue. High potassium causes cardiac arrhythmias that can be fatal. Low calcium causes muscle spasms and tetany. High calcium causes kidney stones and cardiac problems. Managing multiple electrolyte abnormalities simultaneously would be complex and might not be fully possible with limited medical resources on Mars. Blood pH must remain between 7.35 and 7.45. Deviations outside this range are life-threatening. The respiratory system and kidneys work together to maintain pH, expelling acid as carbon dioxide through lungs or excreting it through urine. With respiratory and kidney dysfunction from Mars stresses, pH control could be compromised. Metabolic acidosis or alkalosis could develop, causing confusion, cardiac arrhythmias, and potentially death if severe. Returning to Earth with disordered blood composition would create immediate medical crises. The thick blood from polycythemia would face high G-forces during re-entry and landing, increasing clot risk when you can least afford it. The weak immune system would leave you vulnerable to Earth pathogens your body hasn't seen in years. Platelet dysfunction could cause dangerous bleeding or clotting during the stress of return. Scrambled electrolytes could trigger cardiac arrest during re-entry G-forces. Medical management would be complex and prolonged. Therapeutic phlebotomy to reduce red cell count must be carefully timed to avoid causing anemia. Blood transfusions might be needed if you're anemic, but transfusions carry risks of reactions and infections. Medications to stimulate white cell production exist, but have side effects. Platelet transfusions can temporarily boost counts, but don't fix underlying production problems. Long-term consequences could include permanent bone marrow dysfunction. The radiation-damaged marrow might never fully recover its ability to produce normal blood cells. You could develop myelodysplastic syndrome, where bone marrow produces abnormal cells. This can progress to acute leukemia, which is often fatal. The risk would remain elevated for the rest of your life, a ticking time bomb from your Mars radiation exposure. Chronic transfusion dependence is possible if your marrow can't produce adequate red cells or platelets. Regular transfusions are burdensome, time-consuming, and carry accumulating iron overload that damages organs. Chelation therapy to remove excess iron adds to the treatment burden. Your life would revolve around medical appointments and treatments, never free from the consequences of Mars. Gastrointestinal restructuring and microbiome collapse. Your gastrointestinal tract is a complex ecosystem containing trillions of microorganisms that are essential for digestion, immune function, vitamin production, and even mental health. This microbiome, the collective genome of all these microbes, contains more genes than your own human genome. The bacterial species composition is shaped by diet, environment, and exposure to other people's microbes. On Mars, in a sterile, enclosed habitat with extremely limited diet diversity, your microbiome would lose diversity catastrophically. The consequences would affect digestive health, immune function, mental health, and overall well-being in ways that might be irreversible. The human gut microbiome typically contains hundreds to thousands of different bacterial species, with significant variation between individuals. This diversity is crucial. Different species perform different functions. Some break down specific types of fiber. Others produce vitamins. Some train your immune system. Others produce neurotransmitter precursors. A diverse microbiome is resilient, able to maintain function if some species are lost. A low-diversity microbiome is fragile and dysfunctional. On Mars, microbiome diversity would plummet rapidly. In an enclosed habitat, you'd only be exposed to microbes present in that environment and carried by other colonists. New microbes couldn't arrive from outside because Mars's surface is essentially sterile, scoured by UV radiation and lacking liquid water. The species present when the mission starts would be all you'd ever have, minus those that go extinct during the mission. Extinction would be common. Many bacterial species are specialists that depend on specific dietary components. If those components aren't in your Mars diet, the species can't survive. They dwindle and disappear from your gut. Other species would be outcompeted in the confined environment. The bacterial ecosystem would simplify drastically, losing maybe half or more of its species diversity. Studies of isolated populations demonstrate this effect. Research on astronauts shows significant microbiome diversity loss during ISS missions. A study comparing urban and rural populations found that people in highly sanitized urban environments have less diverse microbiomes than those with more environmental microbial exposure. Mars colonists would experience an extreme version of this, isolated in the ultimate sanitized environment with zero new microbial input for years. The Mars diet would drive further microbiome changes. Food variety would be minimal. Crops grown hydroponically or in greenhouses would be chosen for caloric yield, growth speed, and reliability, not nutritional diversity. You might eat the same 10 to 15 crops repeatedly. Many foods that support healthy microbiomes, like a wide variety of fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and fermented foods, would be absent or rare. Fiber intake, crucial for microbiome health, would likely be insufficient. Fiber is plant material that humans can't digest, but gut bacteria can ferment, producing beneficial short-chain fatty acids like butyrate. Different types of fiber feed different bacterial species. Adequate fiber intake requires consuming diverse plant foods. A monotonous Mars diet of limited crops wouldn't provide the fiber diversity needed to maintain a healthy microbiome. Without sufficient fiber, beneficial bacterial species would starve and disappear. The species that remain would shift toward those that can subsist on host mucus and other available substrates. This often means a shift towards species that are less beneficial or potentially harmful. The microbiome would become dysbiotic, imbalanced in ways that impair health. The consequences of dysbiosis are far-reaching. Certain gut bacteria produce short-chain fatty acids that are crucial for gut health. Butyrate, for instance, is the primary energy source for colonocytes, the cells lining your colon. It reduces inflammation and supports the intestinal barrier. Without adequate butyrate-producing bacteria, gut inflammation increases and the intestinal barrier weakens, potentially leading to increased intestinal permeability, sometimes called leaky gut. A weakened intestinal barrier allows bacterial products and partially digested food particles to enter the bloodstream, triggering immune responses and inflammation throughout the body. This systemic inflammation contributes to numerous health problems, including autoimmune disorders, allergies, metabolic syndrome, and mood disorders. Mars colonists would already face multiple health challenges. Adding chronic inflammation from dysbiosis would compound everything. Vitamin production would be impaired. Certain gut bacteria synthesize vitamin K and B vitamins, including B12, biotin, and folate. Loss of these species would create vitamin deficiencies even if dietary intake seems adequate. Vitamin K is crucial for blood clotting and bone health. B vitamins are essential for energy metabolism, nerve function, and red blood cell production. Deficiencies cause fatigue, cognitive problems, anemia, and impaired wound healing. The immune system would suffer from microbiome loss. Gut bacteria play a crucial role in training and regulating immunity. They interact with immune cells in the gut-associated lymphoid tissue, teaching the immune system to distinguish harmful pathogens from harmless substances. They produce compounds that modulate immune function throughout the body. An impoverished microbiome means impaired immune regulation. This could manifest as increased susceptibility to infections, which Mars colonists already face from other factors. It could also cause immune dysregulation, leading to allergies or autoimmune responses. The immune system, lacking proper microbial education, might overreact to harmless substances or attack the body's own tissues. Autoimmune disorders could develop or worsen during the Mars mission. The gut-brain axis means microbiome changes affect mental health. The gut and brain communicate constantly through neural, hormonal, and immune pathways. Gut bacteria produce neurotransmitters, including serotonin, dopamine, and GABA. They produce their precursors and compounds that influence neurotransmitter production in the brain. They affect vagus nerve signaling between gut and brain. They influence inflammation levels that impact brain function. Research links microbiome composition to depression, anxiety, and cognitive function. People with depression often have altered microbiomes compared to healthy controls. Gut dysbiosis is associated with increased anxiety and cognitive impairment. On Mars, the combination of microbiome collapse and other psychological stresses would create severe mental health risks. Depression and anxiety, already likely from isolation and stress, would be exacerbated by microbiome dysfunction. Digestive symptoms would be common and chronic. Bloating, gas, diarrhea, constipation, cramping and nausea could affect many colonists. These symptoms reduce quality of life and work efficiency. They're also psychologically demoralizing. Dealing with chronic digestive discomfort on top of all other Mars challenges would be exhausting. Medical resources to properly diagnose and treat complex digestive issues would be minimal. Specific conditions like inflammatory bowel disease might develop or worsen. Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis are inflammatory conditions of the digestive tract linked to microbiome dysbiosis and immune dysregulation. The Mars environment, with its microbiome collapse, chronic stress, and altered immune function, could trigger these conditions in susceptible individuals. These are serious chronic diseases requiring ongoing treatment with immune-modulating medications that might not be available on Mars. Returning to Earth would expose you to all the environmental microbes you've been isolated from for years. Your gut, depleted of bacterial diversity, would be colonized by whatever microbes you encounter first. This recolonization would be chaotic and unpredictable. You might develop allergies to microbes that are harmless to most people. Your immune system, having not seen these microbes for years, might overreact. Digestive symptoms during recolonization could be severe. As your gut microbiome shifts, you might experience weeks or months of bloating, diarrhea, cramping, and food intolerances. Your gut barrier, already weakened from years of dysbiosis, might allow excessive bacterial products into your bloodstream, causing inflammatory responses. You could develop new food allergies or intolerances that you never had before. The microbiome changes might be permanent. Once bacterial species are lost from your gut, they might never return. The ecosystem might stabilize at a new low-diversity state different from your pre-Mars microbiome. Studies of antibiotics, which temporarily wipe out much of the gut microbiome, show that recovery is often incomplete. Some species never recolonize. After years on Mars, your microbiome might be permanently impoverished compared to never having gone. Fecal microbiota transplantation might help restore diversity. This procedure involves transplanting stool from a healthy donor into your digestive system, transferring their gut microbes. It's been successful for treating Clostridioides difficile infections and shows promise for other conditions. But using it to restore Mars-damaged microbiomes would be unprecedented. We don't know if it would work, how many transplants would be needed, or what long-term outcomes would be. Probiotic supplements could help but have significant limitations. Most commercial probiotics contain only a few bacterial species, while a healthy microbiome has hundreds. The species in probiotics often don't permanently colonize the gut. They provide transient benefits while you're taking them, but disappear when you stop. For long-term microbiome restoration, you'd need ongoing probiotic use, but even this wouldn't recreate the full diversity you lost. Prebiotic supplementation, providing fiber and other compounds that feed beneficial bacteria, could support microbiome health, but prebiotics only help the bacteria already present. They can't restore species that went extinct. Still, combined with probiotics and careful dietary choices, prebiotics might help maintain the best microbiome possible, given the constraints. The reality is that Mars colonists should expect permanent microbiome impairment. Your gut ecosystem, once rich and diverse, would become a shadow of its former self. The health consequences, digestive, immune, and neurological, would persist for life. This is yet another way that Mars irreversibly changes your biology, leaving you permanently different from people who never left Earth. Social exile and cultural disconnection. The biological changes from Mars would be profound, but they might ultimately prove less insurmountable than the psychological and social barriers to reintegration. Years on Mars would fundamentally alter your psychology, worldview, and ability to relate to other humans. Earth society would continue evolving without you, developing new cultural references, social norms, and shared experiences that you missed entirely. The communication delay during your Mars mission would have already begun eroding your social connections. Returning after years away, you'd find yourself a stranger in your own world, unable to reconnect with the life you left behind, and unable to make others understand what you experienced. The social alienation might be permanent, leaving you forever caught between two worlds, belonging fully to neither. Communication with Earth during your Mars mission would be fundamentally different from normal conversation. The radio signal traveling at light speed takes between 3 and 22 minutes each way, depending on planetary positions. This delay makes real-time conversation impossible. Every interaction becomes an exchange of recorded messages. You speak, wait minutes for the response, then reply, creating a stilted exchange that lacks the spontaneity and emotional connection of normal dialogue. This communication structure would strain relationships from the start. Friendships require regular, spontaneous interaction to maintain. When every conversation requires minutes of waiting, the natural flow is destroyed. You can't laugh together at something in the moment. You can't provide immediate comfort when someone is upset. You can't have the quick back and forth exchanges that build rapport. Relationships would become more formal, more like letter writing than actual conversation. Many friendships wouldn't survive years of this limited contact. People on Earth are living their lives in real time, forming new relationships, having experiences, and moving forward. Your delayed, awkward communication would make you feel distant and disconnected. Friends would gradually stop reaching out. They'd tell themselves they'll message you later, then forget. You'd slowly fade from their lives, becoming someone they used to know rather than an active part of their present. Family relationships would suffer similarly. Parents would age significantly during your absence. If they're elderly when you leave, they might die while you're gone, and you wouldn't be there for their final years. You'd miss weddings, births, graduations, and other milestone events. Your siblings would continue living their lives, having experiences and forming memories that don't include you. When you return, you'd share less and less common ground. Children you left behind would grow up without you. A 6-year-old child when you left would be 11 or 12 when you return. They'd have spent crucial developmental years, essentially parentless. Your relationship would be fractured, possibly irreparably. They'd have formed attachments to other caregivers. You'd be a stranger to them, someone they vaguely remember but don't really know. Rebuilding that relationship would be difficult or impossible. Romantic partnerships face perhaps the greatest strain. Some partners might wait faithfully for years, but maintaining emotional intimacy through delayed communication is extraordinarily difficult. More likely, partners would eventually move on, finding someone present and available. Even if they wait, you'd both change significantly during the separation. The person who returns from Mars won't be the same person who left, and the partner on Earth will have changed too. Reuniting after such a gap would be like meeting someone new, except you're both burdened by expectations from who you used to be. The cultural gap would be jarring and permanent. During your years on Mars, Earth's culture would continue evolving. New music would become popular. New movies and TV shows would become cultural touchstones. New slang and idioms would develop. Political events would unfold, creating new social divisions and perspectives. Technological innovations would change how people live and work. You'd miss all of it, arriving back on Earth culturally displaced, like a time traveller from the past. Social interactions would constantly remind you of this displacement. People would make references you don't understand. They'd expect you to know about events you weren't present for. They'd use phrases and idioms that didn't exist when you left. You'd constantly need to ask for explanations, marking yourself as an outsider. The embarrassment and frustration would make social situations uncomfortable, leading you to avoid them. The perspective shift from Mars living would create a profound psychological gap between you and Earth dwellers. After years of life and death survival challenges where equipment failure means instant death and every resource is precious, Earth concerns would seem trivial. People worrying about their careers, relationships, consumer choices, or entertainment would strike you as absurd. How can they care about such meaningless things when they're not even struggling to survive? This attitude would poison your ability to relate to people. They'd sense your judgment and condescension. They'd feel like you don't take their concerns seriously. But their concerns are serious to them. They're just different from the existential threats you faced on Mars. Your inability to empathize with normal problems would mark you as different, damaged, unable to reintegrate into regular society. People would find you difficult and strange. The intensity of Mars relationships would make Earth relationships seem shallow. On Mars, you depended on your crewmates for survival. Trust wasn't optional, it was existential. You saw each other at worst moments, supported each other through crises, shared experiences that bonded you intensely. These relationships, forged under extreme conditions, would be the deepest of your life. Earth relationships, formed without that pressure, would feel superficial by comparison. You'd find yourself unable to trust or bond with Earth people the way you did with Mars crewmates. They haven't proven themselves in life and death situations. They don't understand what really matters. They seem soft, unreliable, unable to handle real challenges. This attitude would prevent you from forming new meaningful relationships. You'd be lonely and isolated, surrounded by people, but unable to connect with any of them. The media attention would be overwhelming and alienating. Returning Mars colonists would be celebrities, followed by journalists, invited to speak at events, recognized in public. This sounds appealing, but the reality would be isolating. People wouldn't see you as an individual with complex thoughts and feelings. They'd see you as a symbol, a Mars astronaut, an object of fascination. They'd project their own ideas about what you should be onto you. Every interaction would be coloured by your Mars status. People would ask the same questions repeatedly. They'd want to hear about the exciting parts, but wouldn't want to hear about the difficulty, pain, and trauma. They'd treat you as entertainment rather than a person. Genuine human connection would be nearly impossible. You'd be famous but profoundly alone, unable to have normal interactions because everyone knows who you are, but no one really knows you. Employment would be challenging and frustrating. Your skills, honed for Mars survival, might not transfer to Earth jobs. You're an expert at maintaining life support systems, growing crops in hydroponics, repairing equipment with minimal resources, and operating in spacesuits. On Earth, these skills have limited application. You'd need to retrain for a different career, competing with younger workers who have continuous employment histories while you have a multi-year gap filled with irrelevant experience. The jobs you're qualified for might not interest you. After the intensity and importance of Mars work, normal jobs would seem meaningless. You maintained systems that kept people alive. You grew food that meant the difference between life and death. You solved critical problems under pressure. Now you're supposed to care about quarterly earnings reports or customer service metrics? The mundanity would be crushing. Financial reality would be harsh. Mars missions are expensive, and depending on the arrangement, you might return with significant debt. The years away meant no retirement contributions, no property appreciation, no career advancement. You'd be starting over economically in your 30s or 40s, while peers who stayed on Earth have established careers and accumulated wealth. The financial stress would compound all other challenges. Healthcare costs from Mars-induced medical problems would be staggering. The numerous health conditions resulting from your time on Mars would require ongoing treatment. Insurance might not cover conditions resulting from voluntary participation in Mars missions. You could face medical bankruptcy despite having survived one of humanity's greatest adventures. The irony would be bitter. Mental health support would be woefully inadequate. Therapists couldn't truly understand your experiences. How can they help you process trauma from situations they can't even imagine? They'd try to use standard therapeutic approaches developed for Earth-based trauma, but Mars trauma is fundamentally different. Support groups for returning astronauts might exist, but they'd be small, filled with people sharing your problems but unable to solve them. The prevalence of PTSD among returning Mars colonists would likely be high. The constant danger, close calls with death, watching equipment failures nearly kill everyone, possibly witnessing colleague deaths, years of chronic stress all create perfect conditions for PTSD development. Triggers on Earth might cause flashbacks or panic attacks. Loud noises resembling habitat alarms might trigger intense fear responses. Confined spaces might cause claustrophobia from memories of being trapped during emergencies. The psychological scars would be deep and persistent. Depression would be nearly universal among returnees. The combination of social isolation, loss of purpose, inability to relate to others, physical health problems, financial stress, and recognition that your sacrifices might have been for nothing would create overwhelming despair. Some returnees might become suicidal, seeing death as preferable to living as damaged outcasts unable to function in society. The suicide rate among Mars returnees could be disturbingly high. The pull to return to Mars, despite knowing the physical toll, might be overwhelming. Earth would feel alien and hostile. You'd miss the clarity of purpose Mars provided, where every action mattered and contributed to survival. You'd miss the deep bonds with crewmates who understood you in ways Earth people never could. You'd miss being part of something historic and important. Mars, despite its hostility, might feel more like home than Earth ever could again. But your body couldn't survive another tour. The cumulative damage from the first mission would make a second mission impossible. You'd be trapped between two worlds. Mars feels like home, but your body can't go back. Earth is where your body belongs, but your mind and spirit can't adapt. This existential homelessness would be the cruelest fate. You belong nowhere, fitting in neither place, forever displaced and disconnected. The loss of identity would be profound. For years, you were a Mars colonist, defined by that extraordinary role. You had purpose, importance, a clear identity. On Earth, that identity dissolves. You're just another person trying to find their place. But you can't be just another person after what you've experienced. You're fundamentally different, but there's no role for who you've become. You're neither normal nor special, just damaged and displaced. Some returnees might retreat into isolation, unable to handle the complexity of Earth's social life. They'd live alone, minimizing contact with others, perhaps communicating primarily with other Mars returnees who understand. This would be sad, but understandable. The world has changed too much, they've changed too much, and the gap is too wide to bridge. Isolation might be less painful than constant failed attempts to connect. Others might put on a facade, pretending to be normal and okay, while struggling internally. They'd go through the motions of regular life, holding jobs, maintaining relationships, acting like they've readjusted. But inside, they'd be profoundly disconnected and miserable. The constant performance would be exhausting. They'd feel like imposters, play acting at being human when they've become something else. The children of Mars returnees would face unique challenges. Growing up with a parent traumatized by Mars, dealing with their physical limitations, witnessing their social struggles, would be difficult. The parent-child relationship would be strained by the parent's inability to be fully present emotionally. Children might feel resentment toward Mars for taking their parent away and bringing back someone broken. They might feel guilty for these feelings, knowing their parent was heroic, but wishing they'd just stayed home. Relationships between Mars returnees and non-returnees would be fundamentally asymmetric. The returnees have experienced something profound that changed them completely. The non-returnees live in blissful ignorance of how fragile civilization is, how precious resources are, how much we take for granted. The returnees can't unknow what they've learned. They can't unsee what they've seen. This creates an unbridgeable experiential gap that makes true mutual understanding impossible. The bitter realization would settle in slowly. All the sacrifice, all the suffering, all the permanent damage to your body and mind, and for what? You helped establish a Mars colony, which is historically important, but it didn't make your life better. It made it worse. You gave up your health, your relationships, your place in society, your future, and got nothing of value in return except memories that haunt you and a body that betrays you. The regret would be crushing and inescapable. You can't undo what's been done. You can only live with the consequences. Transcendence at a cost. The dream of Mars exploration captures humanity's imagination precisely because it represents our deepest aspiration to transcend our planetary cradle and become a spacefaring species. The vision is romantic and compelling. Brave pioneers establishing humanity's first foothold on another world, expanding our civilization beyond Earth, ensuring our species' survival if catastrophe strikes our home planet. These are powerful ideas that inspire millions to support Mars missions and thousands to volunteer for one-way trips. But the harsh reality is that the human body is exquisitely adapted to Earth-specific conditions, and Mars fundamentally breaks almost every biological system we possess. The physical toll is staggering. Your bones would crumble, losing density at alarming rates until your skeleton can barely support itself. Your muscles would atrophy until simple tasks become monumental challenges. Your cardiovascular system would decondition until your heart struggles to pump blood effectively. Radiation would damage your DNA, increasing cancer risk and potentially causing neurological impairment. Your immune system would collapse, leaving you vulnerable to infections and unable to fight cancers that develop from radiation damage. Your vision would deteriorate from increased intracranial pressure. Your kidneys would be damaged by calcium overload and radiation exposure. Your respiratory system would adapt to Mars' atmosphere and struggle to function on Earth. The list goes on. Every biological system compromised or broken by years in an environment humans never evolved to inhabit. But perhaps even more devastating than the physical damage would be the psychological and social destruction. The isolation would break your connection to Earth humanity. The chronic stress would damage your mental health permanently. The cultural displacement would leave you unable to relate to the society you return to. The loss of purpose after returning would create existential despair. You'd survive the greatest adventure in human history, only to find yourself broken, displaced, and unable to fit into the world you sacrificed everything to return to. This is the tragedy at the heart of Mars exploration, that the journey changes you so fundamentally that home becomes a place you can never truly reach again, even when you're physically standing on Earth's surface.